Friends, how are you today? Happy Saturday to you, and happy afternoon to you. I've been doing a lot of late night lives, which I know are not particularly convenient for some of our fans in different parts of the world. So I decided to revive the pre-pandemic tradition of a Saturday afternoon live. So I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, sitting next to my window, which is providing quite a bit of lighting because it is full daylight. It is afternoon. And because I don't plan on going to sleep anytime soon, it's still afternoon, I have plenty of unnamed diet beverage, which I have in this mason jar, which I will be drinking. Lots of unnamed diet beverage, a long tradition of our broadcast, just like the good old days. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm glad you're all here. Glad we can have a conversation. It's Saturday, so if you haven't already done so, now would be the time to tweet this out. Spread the conversation, make this a bigger conversation. Invite your friends. Invite your friends who might want to join us. That would be good. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. We have a conversation going on in the chat. If you want me to be sure to address something, be sure to put it in a super chat. I will answer every super chat. If you give me a super chat, I give you an answer. It may not be the answer that you want, keep in mind, but I will give you an answer if you give me a super chat. I'm going to do a little bit of a news roundup, let you know what's going on in the world, give you a little bit of our Saturday message, and then we'll do, okay, writing it down. Then after that, we'll do our roll call and let everyone announce themselves. And then after that, I'll answer all the super chats. I might do a dramatic reading from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. Is COVID denialism akin to genocide denialism? Libertarians are most likely. Okay. COVID denialism. All right. Consequences of U.S. collapse around the world. Consequences of U.S. collapse around the world. Writing down the super chats as they come. No problem. And we'll be doing our roll call after I finish my opening remarks. And then from there, I'll answer all the super chats. And then from there, we may as well, we may have a dramatic reading if we have time, if folks are still around. Have you ever heard of Leo Panitch and the Socialist Register? I have not heard of Leo Panitch and the Socialist Register, so I can't give you a comment on that because I've never heard of those individuals. But thanks for asking. But yeah. So after all of that, what are you to 5 countries you believe revolution in the next few years? Okay, I'm writing it down. All right. I'm glad you're all with us. And on that note, I will take another sip of the unnamed diet beverage. LGBT employment ruling. Okay, writing it down. All right. And we'll jump right into it. Folks, a lot of things are happening right now. For example, there is talk that there will be likely not school in the fall for many of America's school children. They will continue distance learning from home on computers because of the pandemic. It's likely that many U.S. states will not be having school in the fall. Karl Marx, racist. Writing it down. It's likely that many schools will not be having sessions in the fall. We have 32 U.S. states that are seeing an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. So it looks like a lot of teachers are going to be teaching from home. A lot of kids are going to be at home. And I will say I pity these kids. I mean, I really do. That sucks. I thought high school was boring enough going to school every day. Imagine sitting in your parents' house every day. It's got to be miserable. So I have deep sympathy. I have deep sympathy for any elementary, junior high, or high school student coming up in the fall who maybe is most likely going to be learning from home. Now, there's talk that some places will have school, but it'll be optional to actually go to class. They won't require people to go to class because of the risk of COVID-19. Plus, from what we understand, the kids will probably have to wear masks all day at school. Sounds not good to me. Sounds like a not good situation. So deep sympathy there. Another detail. 8%, that's 1 in 12 homeowners in the United States has not paid their mortgage. 1 in 12 homes in the United States. So when the freeze on evictions is lifted, as we come out of the pandemic, there is going to be home foreclosures left and right. You thought 2008 and 2009 and the financial crisis, the housing bubble burst, you thought that was bad. Wait till what's about to happen in the United States. 8%. 8%. 1 in 12 Americans has not paid their mortgage and is on the verge of probably losing their homes. Probably losing their homes when this pandemic freeze on evictions and foreclosures is lifted. That's big. That's very, very big. And that's going to have a huge impact, not just on the people who lose their homes. It's going to impact the whole housing market. Those who don't lose their homes are going to see their homes' value vastly decrease because there will be so many homes on the market. So many homes on the market. On top of that, many people are noting that there's probably going to be a decline in the value of property within cities because many people are no longer seeing the appeal of living in a city because of the pandemic. The appeal of cities is that you just go out and do things, right? You don't have to drive 100 miles to go to a show or go to a restaurant or anything because it's all right there because you're in the city. Well, in a pandemic, when everything's closed down, the appeal of cities, the value of cities kind of goes away. And so people are talking about the housing market in the United States taking a real tank. That's the situation. What else is going on in the world today? Trump is urging the Supreme Court to invalidate Obamacare. Yeah. It's amazing. Healthcare in the United States is a disaster. It's a nightmare. People don't have insurance. The insurance people do have doesn't provide it to them. The population is not guaranteed healthcare. Millions are uninsured. But the right wing insists that, Obamacare is communism. Obamacare, private insurance companies regulating themselves, a mandate that you buy insurance from a private company, a website that doesn't work. The right wing has declared that that's communism, right? It's communism. I've heard them say it on Fox News. They say, Obama, first he took over the auto industry. No, he didn't. He bailed it out. Conservatorship, non-voting stock. Yeah, no. Then he took over Wall Street. No, he didn't. How did the Black Panther Party fund its survival programs? Okay, writing it down. Furthermore, folks, the right wing basically declares that Obamacare is communism. And I've seen it many times on Fox News. First, he took over the auto industry. Then he took over Wall Street. No, he regulated it slightly. And then he took over healthcare. Obama, the government runs everything in America now. No, it doesn't, actually. But regardless, Trump is now urging the Supreme Court to invalidate Obamacare because of the healthcare mandate, right? And I mean, there's fair criticism of the mandate. I mean, ordering you to buy a product from a private company, right? Is that a violation of your civil liberties? Now, they argue it's like auto insurance. You have to drive a car. In order to drive your car, you have to have insurance. Why? Because when you drive, you might injure someone else, right? And they argue that it's a threat to public health to have people that are uninsured. So you can be required with this mandate that you have health insurance. Now, many Americans simply don't have health insurance, and so they get a fine when they pay their taxes. Their tax refund has, a health care penalty imposed on them. But regardless of all of this, the right wing declares that Obamacare, which is awful compared to any other industrial country in the world, it's not guaranteed health care. It's not national health care. It's not single payer. It's simply, a program where the government facilitates private insurance companies continuing to rip off the public and big pharma, etc. The right wing insists it's communism. And this is a big part of their narrative. And so, of course, Obamacare is trending on social media, and the Trumpers are declaring that somehow the pandemic has been caused by Obamacare, and Obamacare is communism. Shows how wild political discourse is in the United States. Police officers in New York City are retiring at a much higher rate. Many people do not want to be police officers. The leader of the Patrolmen's Union is quoted as saying that morale among New York City police officers is the lowest it has been in 38 years. The lowest it has been in 38 years. Okay, Belarus, writing it down. Happy to talk about it. Meanwhile, there is a little encampment that has been set up. Tucker Carlson. Wow, you're just rolling in the super chats? Well, I'll keep rolling out the answers. Tucker Carlson. An encampment has been set up by protesters to defund the NYPD. And this seems to be the latest kind of political gathering that's happening. People are demanding that the city of New York direct funds elsewhere. There's talk of a police strike on July 4th, of the police going on strike on July 4th. The Police Officers Union in New York City, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, it's called, is raising the alarm about how angry they are at the public, at the city, at the government. They feel like they're under attack, which I don't understand how that's. I mean, it's like we're not seeing New York City cops being arrested. They were holding protesters without charges indefinitely. I mean, they drove their car into protesters, and the mayor, Bill de Blasio, called them, said they acted admirably and with restraint. So I don't understand why the New York City Police Department feels it's under attack. I really don't. I mean, there's some talk of redirecting some funding to different programs, but somehow the New York City Police Department feels that it is under attack, and they are raising the alarm, possibly going on police strike on July 4th. So we'll see what happens there. If that just means that a lot of people have more open carry alcohol in the parks on July 4th, or if that means that people go on a rampage, and I mean, who knows what will happen. So we're all kind of anticipating that. I'll tell you, I'll be staying indoors on July 4th. I'll tell you that much, because, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But yes, that's what's going on in the United States. But I wanted to give you just a global perspective for a minute. Just a global perspective on what's happening. Germany and the USA seem to be at odds. Germany and the United States are not getting along. Trump removed some U.S. troops from Germany. Angela Merkel shot back, saying we didn't need them. The Germans did not need U.S. troops. And Germany and the European Union countries are increasingly becoming more friendly to China and China's Belt and Road Initiative. And in fact, Germany is considering working with China to build some maglev trains. So that's quite interesting. Furthermore, Israel is planning to annex the West Bank, right? It's making noise that it's going to take some very, very dramatic moves against Palestinians. And the European Union is opposing Israel taking this move. The United Nations is opposing Israel taking this move. The The United States seems to be the only country in the world backing Israel in their plan for an upcoming annexation of the West Bank. Israel is basically being told by the whole world, do not do this, but the Trump administration is backing Netanyahu, and the United States seems to be standing alone on all of this. Another interesting point, the New York Times ran an article claiming that Russia is paying bounties to terrorists and jihadists and al-Qaeda types in Afghanistan if they kill American troops. No evidence is presented in the article. Not a single shred of evidence is presented. All that is cited is American intelligence sources. And of course, the Russian Foreign Ministry shot back and said that this shows the, quote, low intellectual abilities of the propagandists of U.S. intelligence. And I think that Russia is absolutely correct. There is no reason. Think about this. There is no reason that Russia would pay terrorists to kill U.S. troops. What sense in the world would that make? I think this is a lie. I think this is a crock. I believe Russia is right when they say this is the low intellectual abilities of propagandists of U.S. intelligence. It makes absolutely no sense. I've said many times, why is Afghanistan unstable, right? We know that Afghanistan, 1978, they had the Sour Revolution. The People's Democratic Party took power. In response to the People's Democratic Party taking power, the CIA and Saudi Arabia and Osama bin Laden and the Pakistani military dictatorship and unfortunately China and the Uyghur regions, they all kind of teamed up to wage a big war against the People's Democratic Party and the socialist government of Afghanistan. And that war took millions of lives, and millions of people became refugees, and it went on and on and on, and lots of people died. It was an awful, awful conflict. But after that conflict, the religious governments that came into power, there were factional struggles, and a faction called the Taliban took power in the 1990s. And the Taliban took power. They were a faction among the religious extremists who'd been backed by the United States and Saudi Arabia to fight the Soviet Union. And what was shocking was it seemed like, for a brief moment, the Taliban was a little more independent, right? And the Taliban, they wiped out, the drug dealers. They had a huge crackdown on drug cartels, and the UN, a lot of people praised them for what they were doing. And they wouldn't go along with U.S. plans for oil pipelines, and they were acting a little more independent. And we know that after 9/11, the Taliban was overthrown. And as a result of the Taliban being overthrown, Afghanistan has been in chaos ever since 2001. At no point has there been stability in Afghanistan since then. The Taliban controls various al-Qaeda-like terrorist groups control areas, drug cartels. Since the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, the United States troops have been there, but the drug cartels have been there, and it's become the heroin capital of the world. Opium poppy fields have sprouted up all over the country. That's the situation in Afghanistan. And why is this strategic for the United States? Because if you look at a map, Afghanistan is the strategic epicenter of chaos. There are three major geopolitical rivals of Western capitalism all around Afghanistan. Russia is north of Afghanistan. Iran is east of Afghanistan, and west of Afghanistan you find China. The USA wants to destabilize China. The United States wants to destabilize Russia. The United States wants to destabilize Iran. So creating chaos and instability in Afghanistan is in the interest of the United States. The instability flows into Iran. They have a huge problem in Iran with heroin dealers, with Sunni separatists rooted in Afghanistan, terrorists, Jindallah. The problem flows up into Russia, terrorist groups that operate in the southern former USSR and in Central Asia, heroin gangs. Russia has had a big problem ever since Afghanistan was destabilized by the United States. China, Uyghur regions, instability, heroin gangs, terrorist groups. Having Afghanistan as a strategic epicenter of chaos. Why was China? We'll talk about that. having Afghanistan as a strategic epicenter of chaos is part of the strategy of Western capitalism for maintaining dominance in the world. The control of Eurasia has long been an obsession of Western geopolitical strategists. You can talk about Zbigniew Brzezinski and his book, The Grand Chessboard, which is all about Eurasia and the struggle to control Eurasia, and this idea that Western capitalism can maintain control of the Eurasian hemisphere by destabilizing it, by funding terrorist groups, by keeping it poor. That's been a central part of U.S. foreign policy strategy for a long time, and it seems to be what they're trying to do. Now, at this point, Russia and China are doing their best to try and bring the Eurasian hemisphere out of poverty, and they're doing miraculous, amazing things. Asil Toji, who I had the honor of hearing speak at the Valdi Discussion Club in Sochi, Russia. He's the head of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, very, very well respected. That's like the Nobel Prize people. He talked about how in Eurasia right now it is a golden era. Russia is building trains. China is building trains. People are being lifted out of poverty. Electricity is being brought to regions. All those countries that you don't hear much about, like Kazakhstan, like Uzbekistan, like Turkmenistan, are now experiencing economic growth like they've never had before. Russia's Far East is experiencing economic growth. Regions of China that you haven't heard about, like the Uyghur regions, right? Like Tibet, are experiencing big forms of growth. There's the Pakistan-China friendship, the Pakistan-China economic cooperation, right? The Pakistan-China Economic Corridor, CPAC, it is resulting in huge levels of poverty alleviation in Pakistan. And all kinds of amazing things are happening on the Eurasian subcontinent, the Eurasian hemisphere. And it's mainly centered around Russia and China. They're trying to stabilize Eurasia, make Eurasia an economic base to build from, make Eurasia a strong competitor with Western capitalism, raise people out of poverty, and restructure the global economy to be based on win-win cooperation, not about zero-sum game politics where some countries win at the expense of other countries, but win-win cooperation. And they're expanding this into Africa. You should read about how Russia is heavily involved in bringing nuclear power to countries in Africa, right? How Russia has been involved in helping Tunisia to be on the verge of launching a satellite. Tunisia has never launched a satellite before, but Russia is working with Tunisia. You can read about the Eurasian Economic Union that Russia has set up. You can read about the One Belt, One Road initiative of China, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. There is an alternative on the global scene. There is an alternative global order, an alternative economy that is emerging in the world. And the achievements of that alternative are showing up all around us. Huawei Technologies, which is a cell phone manufacturing company. It's a telecommunications company in China. It is a state-controlled mega corporation. It is technically a cooperative under Chinese law. Harvard Business Review talked about how Huawei Technologies is actually able to make better phones and able to do so much because of their profit-sharing program. Harvard Business Review in 2015, before the trade war started, back when you were allowed to say this kind of thing, praised Huawei and said it was a great example of profit sharing working because the workers at Huawei Technology are paid a share of the profits because the Chinese state directs Huawei and what to do. It's technically a cooperative, not a government industry, not a state-owned enterprise, but it's controlled by the Chinese state and it functions according to their state central plan. It works in coordination with the Chinese military. It has become the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, and the phones that Huawei makes are better than Western phones. They are just higher quality. The cameras on the phones are better. The battery life is better. You talk about Huawei Technologies is always trying to make a better phone. Where Apple, what has Apple done? Apple has been caught intentionally making phones break down. Intentionally making phones that have wear and tear so they can make more money. That's the difference between a corporation functioning in capitalism and a corporation functioning in socialism. Apple Technologies, Apple tried to make your phone break down, so you had to buy another one. Huawei Technologies has worked very, very hard to make a phone that will last as long as it possibly can. Why? Because Huawei Technologies is not simply functioning according to profit. It's functioning according to the state central plan, and it is in the interest of China overall to make better phones. Whereas Apple's interest is making profits. Planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence. Apple was caught doing planned obsolescence. Meanwhile, Huawei Technologies makes better phones. So, of course, what is the response of the U.S. government? Is it to say, wow, we believe in free trade and free markets and Adam Smith, so I guess Huawei makes better phones. Americans can buy them. Oh, no. We all know about the war on Huawei technologies. The war on Huawei technologies. It's illegal to buy them in the United States. The USA is putting pressure on countries around the world not to contract and do business with Huawei for 5G. The U.S. government has gone out of its way to declare war on Huawei technologies because it does a better job. It simply does a better job. It simply does a better job than American corporations. And you'll also notice that what is their argument against Huawei Technologies? They claim that Huawei Technologies is somehow involved in Chinese intelligence or spying or something. They don't have any evidence of that. Meanwhile, WikiLeaks has revealed that Verizon is heavily involved in government spying. AT&T is heavily involved in government spying. That there was a whole program where the NSA was working with American cell phone and telecommunications companies to spy and violate the sanctity of missions, of UN missions, to spy on UN missions, to spy on people. They were tapping the phone of Angela Merkel long before she was the Prime Minister of Germany. So American cell phone companies are spying on people all over the world. Everyone knows it. Meanwhile, we have no evidence that China is using Huawei to spy on people, but we're telling people all over the world, don't buy Huawei. You know, all kinds of things. We're making it impossible for Americans to buy Huawei because somebody in intelligence says something. This is particularly unbelievable, right? That Huawei Technologies, functioning as part of China's state centrally planned economy, is a better phone manufacturer. They just opened a flagship store in Shanghai. There were people lined up in masks around the block to see this new flagship store made by Huawei Technologies. What else is going on? China has just unveiled a maglev train that goes even faster. China was already making the fastest trains in the entire world. Well, now they've just unveiled a maglev train that goes even faster than their previous trains. China is making the fastest trains in the world. China is making the world's best cell phones. China has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Meanwhile, in the United States, the pandemic has caused our society to just kind of break down and fall apart. And there you go, folks. Folks, the problem before the pandemic was capitalism. The pandemic is simply intensifying the problems that were already there. What is capitalism? Capitalism is a system in which production is carried out for profit. Friedrich Engels said that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. The means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Meaning that houses don't get built so people can live in them. Houses get built so landlords and banks and, companies can make profits from them. Food is not produced so people can eat it. Food is produced under capitalism so that big box stores and agribusiness companies can make profits from selling it. We don't produce for use. We don't have production for use. We have production for profit. That's capitalism. Mao Zedong said that capitalism is profits in command. Capitalism is production for profit. It is a system where the centers of economic power, the means of production, the banks, the factories, the industries, the farms, the oil wells, the means of transportation, the means of communication, all these major commanding heights of economic power are privately owned and operated so that those who privately own them, the capitalists, can make profits from them. That is what capitalism is. No, capitalism is not you having money. No, capitalism is not freedom. No, capitalism is not the American way of life and liberty. No, real capitalism is not a world without a government. Capitalism is the system of production for profit. That's what capitalism is. And capitalism is historically outmoded. Capitalism was a great advance over feudalism, way better than feudalism. Feudalism, subsistence farming, serfs and landowners, yeah, capitalism got rid of it back in the 1700s, 1800s, got rid of feudalism, good for them, right? Capitalism was a great advance over feudalism. Feudalism was a great advance over slavery, and meanwhile, slavery was a great advance over hunter-gatherer civilization. History is like a train speeding forward, and capitalism was a great advance over what was there before, but no longer is capitalism productive. Capitalism has a lot of problems. And the biggest problem with capitalism is that it leads to a contradiction between technological progress and economic growth and popular living standards. Under capitalism, the capitalist is constantly driving to advance technology. He wants to make production as efficient as possible. He wants to extract oil from the ground as efficiently as possible. He wants to churn out iPhones and iPads quicker and more efficiently than ever before. He wants to produce things as efficiently as he can. And so in order to do that, he's constantly trying to advance technology. Because more technology, more efficient technology, means fewer workers can be hired. Furthermore, it means those workers that are hired can be paid a significantly less wage, lower wage, because they are de-skilled. The capitalist is constantly trying to pay as little as possible for labor costs and to hire as few workers as possible. And in order to do this, he can maximize profits. And he can churn out more iPads, more iPhones, more oil, more cars, more commodities can be churned out with fewer workers being involved in the process of production. But there's a bit of a problem with that. Who's going to buy these products? Who's going to buy them? If you eliminate the jobs on the assembly line, if you replace workers with machines, if you drop the wages of the workers that you do have by de-skilling their jobs, making them easier to replace, who is going to buy these products? The problem with capitalism is the more efficient production becomes, the more technology advances, the poorer the population gets. And pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. Egypt, Libya, got it. Pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. And there is a crisis. And this is the boom-bust cycle of capitalism. You learn about boom-bust in school, boom-bust depression, etc., the market cycle. This is that cycle. It's caused by the fact that in capitalism there is a contradiction between growth and prosperity. Abundance creates poverty under capitalism. Let me repeat that. Under capitalism, abundance creates poverty. In systems of the past, when there was a shortage of housing, people were homeless. But in 2008, 2009, the U.S. economy crashed, the bubble burst, not because there was a shortage of housing, but because there was too much housing. What was, it said, Neocolonialism, Last Stage of Imperialism by Nkrumah, build on Lenin's work. Got it. Writing it down. That's what happened. I was in Detroit as it was going down, and I saw it with my own eyes. People were becoming homeless because there was too much housing. Right? The housing bubble burst. What had happened? Alan Greenspan was desperate to keep Americans buying homes. The standard of living of Americans had vastly gone down. Because union jobs were eliminated, industrial jobs were eliminated, living standards were decreasing, student debt, for many, many reasons, living standards in the United States were decreasing. Had been since about the 1980s. So living standards in the United States were decreasing, but Americans needed to keep buying homes because housing, home construction, that's a big part of the U.S. economy. So Alan Greenspan legalized all kinds of mortgage lending that had previously been illegal. Alan Greenspan was the head of the Federal Reserve. He was a follower of Ayn Rand. He was actually very close to Ayn Rand, would go to jazz concerts with Ayn Rand, had hung out with Ayn Rand since he was a teenager. And he legalized all kinds of lending practices that had previously been illegal to keep Americans buying homes. But it only worked for so long. And pretty soon, a lot of homes were being foreclosed. Pretty soon, neighborhoods all over Detroit were empty because the homes had been foreclosed. Pretty soon, neighborhoods all over California were empty because homes had been foreclosed. Cleveland was devastated. Pittsburgh was devastated. So many centers, prosperous cities throughout the United States just were gutted and looted. The housing bubble burst, and there were so many empty houses that all the people that had jobs building houses or selling houses weren't making any money. And banks collapsed, and we had the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. What was going on? People became homeless, right? In Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, all these people who'd lost their homes were living in tents. They set up a tent city where all these Americans who previously had homes to live in spent the Christmas holiday of 2008 and New Year's 2009 living in a tent, living in little tents in this tent city outside of Las Vegas. Why? Because there wasn't enough housing? No, because there was too much housing. People were homeless because there was too much housing. Meanwhile, people become hungry, not because there's a shortage of food, but because there is too much food. Right? That's capitalism. It is production, organized not for use, but for profit. There's an old parable from Poland about a coal miner. The coal miner is at home with his son. And it's winter time. It gets rather cold in Poland sometimes during the winter. And the coal miner says to his son, "How you doing there?" And the son says, "Daddy, I'm cold." "Why is it so cold?" And the father replies, he says, "Well, it's cold because we can't afford any coal to heat our home." And the son says to the father, he says, Why can't we afford any coal to heat our home?" And the father says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I lost my job at the coal mine." The son says to the father, he says, "Father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" And the father replies, "Because there is too much coal." That is the problem of capitalism. Capitalism leads to a situation where the more abundance is created, the more technology advances, the more poverty exists. Because under capitalism, the only value that human beings have is their ability to sell their labor. Human labor power is a commodity. The capitalists buy for the lowest price possible, and the working class can only live so long as they work, and can only work so long as their labor enriches capital. And economic crises under capitalism happen when there are great advances in technology, when technology speeds ahead, when new innovations come about and create more efficient modes of production. There becomes a big economic crisis because of this. This is highly irrational. If you look throughout history, World War I came after a huge leap in technological production. World War II followed the Great Depression, and the Great Depression was very much caused by huge leaps in technological advances of production. And the economic crisis that we are facing now in the United States of America is the result of a huge leap in technological production. Artificial intelligence, iPhones, smartphones, 3D printers, all of this has led to a situation where workers at the assembly line are being eliminated. They don't need workers any longer. And as a result, our communities are falling to pieces. Roads are unpaved all throughout the United States. They are literally unpaving the roads all across the United States. They have a device they call a reclaimer that rips up the asphalt, pulverizes it, and where you once had a paved asphalt road, you have a dirt road. For the last 10 years, municipalities across the United States have been unpaving the roads. Meanwhile, same time, municipalities across the United States are no longer providing fire protection. You can read about this. There are instances across the United States where in order to have the fire department come to your house, you have to pay. You have to pay fire insurance. In Tennessee, there was a home that burned to the ground. Why? Why did it burn to the ground? Because the family had not paid their fire insurance. So the fire department came, but they read, they didn't pay their fire insurance, and their home burned to the ground. Read about this. It was a disaster. Firemen across the United States are losing their jobs. Right? That's a reality. Many firemen have lost their benefits, lost their jobs, been laid off. This is capitalism in crisis. Our water's not being properly purified. And when we pay our taxes, that money doesn't even go to the government. It goes to pay back the loan, the debt that our government has already run up to private bankers. Private bankers have rigged the system. So the government, its budget is based on debt that they've already racked up. They borrow money and spend it, and your tax money is not going to the government. Your tax money is going to pay back the bankers who've already rigged the government to be in debt to them. Furthermore, we have the Federal Reserve printing our money. The U.S. Constitution mandates that money be printed only by the federal government of the United States, the elected government, but that's been ignored. Instead, our money is being printed by a private corporation called the Federal Reserve. And every dollar that is printed results in more debt. To print money, the government gets into debt. This is capitalism in crisis. And it's playing out all around us. This was the reality before the pandemic. And the pandemic made everything far, far worse because there was an inability on the part of our government to mobilize the population to effectively beat back the pandemic. Rebecca Long Bailey has been kicked out of the Labor Party for pointing out Israel trains American police. Thoughts? Wow, I was not aware of that. Rebecca Long Bailey. Writing it down. I will get to all your super chats. This is capitalism in crisis. This is a system of production for profit failing and coming to a grinding halt. Did the Nazis have direct command over private areas of the economy? I'll write it down. This is capitalism in crisis. This is a system of production for profit failing all around us. But there is a way out. There is a way out of this madness. Before I give it a name, I'll call it common sense. It's pretty obvious. The way out of this madness is to have the factories and big box stores and banks and oil wells and telecommunications companies and centers of economic power function in a rational way. The way out of this madness is to have the economy not function according to the chaos of the market. It's to get rid of the anarchy of production. It is to abolish the system of production for profit. It's to have the economy organized in a rational way. Instead of letting every capitalist just do whatever they want, instead of letting the economy continue to function in a way that, hey, they're making profits, everyone just does whatever is profitable for them, and society falls to shreds, but every capitalist is just running whichever way makes profits for them. Instead of doing that, the answer is for the economy to be organized to serve public good. Milosevic. The answer is for the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries to be controlled by the people. The state should plan out the production. The economy should be controlled by society. So everyone is taken care of. Everyone has what they need. Innovators are unleashed. Creativity is lifted to new heights. We find the Einsteins and the Mozarts among the next generation. We empower the population. We enable people to be creative. We enable people to grow. When the state controls the means of production, and when the state has an understanding that it is obligated to improve people's living standards, things get better. Socialism, yes, socialism. Socialism isn't the government giving people free stuff. That happens under every system. Socialism isn't redistributive income taxes. There's some form of taxation under every system. Socialism isn't everyone getting paid the exact same wage no matter how hard they work. Socialism is a system which the economy is rationally planned, and growth is no longer restrained by the irrationality of the market. Socialism is a planned economy. And socialism is the way out of this crisis. And around the world, the socialist countries have managed to weather the storm of this pandemic amazingly. Look at what Cuba has done in the face of this pandemic. Look at what Venezuela has done in the face of this pandemic. Look how effectively China has mobilized the public against this pandemic. Look how effectively Vietnam has organized the public against this pandemic. The countries where the economy is not irrational. The countries the countries in which the means of production is controlled by society, in which the economy is centrally planned, have managed to get through this pandemic amazingly well. You know, China got this pandemic before anybody else. They didn't have warning. The rest of the world had warning about the pandemic. China had no warning. However, they've done amazingly well in mobilizing the public and organizing the society, and they have done amazing things, and it's really unprecedented. Unprecedented what China has done. Their economy is already bouncing back, swinging into action. I just told you about the new Huawei flagship store that just opened up in Shanghai. Read about what Vietnam has accomplished. Read about even in Kerala, the region of India controlled by the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and how they mobilized the public against the pandemic and took care of people. Everywhere we see socialism triumphing. We see Eurasia raising people out of poverty and making huge economic achievements with socialism. Meanwhile, we see the capitalist West, the United States, the country that's more capitalist than any Western country. We don't give people no stinking health care here in the United States. What? You want health care? Go out and get a job. Work for it, loser. Right? We don't give people national health care. Oh, you want to go to college? Well, go get a loan from a bank and be in debt for the rest of your life, loser. We don't give you free education. That's America. The Wild West country. The free market, the land of Adam Smith British Empire economics. The country that has adopted and swallowed the swallowed hook, line, and sinker, the greed is good myth, the no such thing as society philosophy. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You're on your own, buddy. That country, the United States of America, has handled this pandemic disastrously. Disastrously, they have handled this pandemic. It has been a nightmare what's going on here. We are on the verge of an economic meltdown. Like I said, 8%, 1 in 12 households have not paid their mortgages. We're about to have a housing bubble crash once again. Mass unemployment because of the pandemic. The rate of public debt, student debt, home mortgage debt through the roof, living standards dropping, household wealth decreasing, roads unpaved, water not being properly purified, lack of public transportation, private prisons, opioid deaths. We're seeing all of this continue to play out. Capitalism is in crisis. And later in this broadcast, I'm going to read to you from my book, City Builders and Vandals, because at the beginning of this book, I talk about the fall of the Roman Empire. Folks, we are living in the fall of the Roman Empire 2.0. The fall of Rome 2,000 years ago was about like the fall of America. Capitalism is collapsing. Capitalism is falling. Capitalism cannot continue. The rule of profits cannot continue to organize the economy. But I think we're standing at a crossroads. I believe that if America could break out of capitalism, if the people of the United States could look into their roots and their history and discover the great revolutionaries like John Brown, the great revolutionaries like Harriet Tubman, the great revolutionaries like William Z. Foster and Gus Hall, if the progressive side of America, the Americans who've always cared for one another, the Americans who've stood against these unjust wars, the Americans who built the labor movement, who built the suffrage movement for the women's right to vote, who built the unemployment councils, the Americans who empowered Roosevelt, the Americans who empowered Lincoln, if the progressive side of America could awaken and assert itself, things in the United States could dramatically turn around. We are standing at a crossroads as a country. This is the moment. You know, I know some people who are in AA, and they say sometimes that before you can get into recovery, before you can deal with your alcoholism, you have to hit rock bottom. Right? Somebody might know that they have a problem with drinking or a problem with drugs, but they have to hit rock bottom before they're really willing to deal with it. Folks, I think America is approaching rock bottom. It's approaching that moment where we're going to have that moment of clarity and recognize that our love affair with free markets and capitalism and radical individualism has to come to an end. Look at what's going on the streets right now. Look at this pandemic situation. The Trump presidency, the COVID-19 meltdown, the crisis of police brutality and prisons for profits. This is America's rock bottom moment. The country is going to be forced to recognize that greed is not good, that selfishness is not a virtue, and that we have still an opportunity to turn things around. To turn things around in this moment, to change our role in the world, to change how our economy is organized, to stop making our population stupider and develop an educational system that makes our population smarter, to stop believing that the state should sit back and allow capitalists to do whatever they want, and instead believing that the banks, factories, and industries should be organized to serve public good. This is America's moment of clarity. This is the moment where we have to think, how did we get here, and how do we get out of this? And we can get out of this. The Roman Empire had a chance to get out of this, and I'll talk about that. Later in the live, I'm going to read you about Julius Caesar. I'm going to read you about when Rome stood at a crossroads and made the wrong choice. And the catastrophe, the catastrophic results of Rome sitting in a moment like this. In about 40 BC, 44 BC, Rome, the Roman Empire, sat in a moment just like this, realizing that their system was unsustainable, realizing that their relationship with the world wasn't going to work, realizing that they couldn't continue. Rome sat at a moment like this, a crossroads, and they made the wrong choice. They made the wrong choice, and the result was a disaster. The result was a disaster, folks. It took 1,500 years for the life expectancy of people in Europe to return to what it had been at the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire resulted in mass poverty. Human beings became inches shorter as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was an awful, awful empire. I'm not praising the Roman Empire. I'm not praising the Roman Empire at all. But what replaced the Roman Empire was even worse, was disaster, collapse, chaos, the fall of a civilization. But there was a moment, there was a brief moment where the Roman Empire had the opportunity to turn things around, to change its relationship with the world. But they made the wrong choice. As a society, the Roman Empire made the wrong choice, and the disaster that resulted from their decision, the long-term implications for thousands of years of the decision that the people in the city of Rome made, it impacted human civilization like you wouldn't believe. You know, there's a reason that at the time of the American Revolution, all the founding fathers, they call them, of the United States were reading a book by Edward Gibbon on the fall of Rome. Because in the 1700s, Europe had just gotten back to about the same level of economic development as at the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. And as people were settling in the United States and killing Native Americans and practicing slavery, They were thinking about, maybe we can learn from the fall of Rome. Maybe we can get it right this time. Maybe we can get human civilization right. That's why in upstate New York, a lot of cities have Roman names, like Syracuse, right? Or Greek and Roman names. That's why, many of the buildings in Washington, D.C. have Greek and Roman, columns and imagery like that. The reason for that is because the founders of the United States saw Rome as the past civilization that was successful. And they were reading The Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, trying to figure out what Rome got wrong as they were trying to build a new civilization in the United States. Well, Edward Gibbon doesn't understand why Rome fell, because he doesn't have the science of Marxism. It was Marxism that helps us understand why the Roman Empire fell. It's Marxism that helps us understand why feudalism was crushed and replaced with capitalism. It's Marxism and dialectical and historical materialism that gives us the ability to understand why history is moving and why it's not. And after I answer your super chats, I will be reading to you about the fall of Rome, so you can understand it. We are at a precipice in this country. We are at a turning point. But we can make a decision as a society about whether or not we can turn things around. So on that note, folks, I really appreciate you being with me on Saturday afternoon. It's nice weather out there, and it's a lovely afternoon. I'm going to take a sip of unnamed diet beverage. I'm going to urge you all to tweet this out, share this, make this a bigger conversation, bring people on board. The more people here, the merrier. Bring people on board, make this a bigger conversation. Please put this on your Reddit, put this on your Facebook, put this on your Twitter. Bring people along. Let's make this a bigger conversation. Bring people on board. The more people, the merrier. Post this on your Facebook, Twitter, share it. Spread the word, hit the like button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit that notifications bell so that you get the notification of when we do our next live. And now is the time, as you're all doing that and making this a bigger conversation, now is the time. How does the falling rate of profit factor into the crisis of overproduction? Explain slowly. All righty. Now is the time, folks. Now is the time for you all to give me your names and locations, and I call you out as I see you. Call you out as I see you. Who's here with us? Fairhope, Alabama is with us. Fairhope, Alabama, Nicholas Lynch. Belfast, Culver City, Los Angeles. Ali from Oman. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. New Jersey, Brussels, Belgian Workers' Party. Long Island, New York. Nashville, Tennessee, Ukraine, Los Angeles, Sam Levin, Jesus from Spain, Caleb, Mark from California, Phoenix, Arizona, Arthur Porter, Liverpool, UK, Vallejo, California, Pennsylvania, USA, Vienna, Austria, Washington State, Springfield, Missouri, Hamilton, Ontario, Long Island, New York, Australia, Copenhagen, Georgia, Red Baron from Iran, Miami, Guy from Miami, Alberta, Canada, Mantua, Italy, North Carolina, the Moon, Chandler from Georgia, Rocky from Reno, Nevada. Who else is with us today? Glasgow Autonomous Zone, Bazinga Baby, Southern California, North Carolina, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, East Germany, Italy, Venice, Germany, Independence, Missouri, Rachel Martinez, Dimitri from Dusty, Austin, Texas, Oklahoma, Steve, San Marcos, Texas, Alberta, Canada, South Louisiana, New Jersey, Jack Dundee from the United Kingdom, Denmark, East Germany, Etatist, Springfield, New Jersey, Mexico, Macedonia, California, Buffalo, New York, Shaniqua, Corona, California, Space Communist, Conservative Socialist in Maryland, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Jack Dundee in the United Kingdom, Hello from Toronto, Canada. Greece, from the Communist Party of Greece, someone says, from the KKE, the Greek Communist Party. Rachel Martinez, Colorado, California, Lincolnshire, United Kingdom. Julian from Lewis, UK. Joanne from the Netherlands. Jack Dundee from the United Kingdom is with us. Amsterdam, says Sam. Georgian laborer. Who else is with us today? Names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you. I want to make sure that everyone. Czech Republic is with us today. Someone from the Czech Republic. Wow. Wow, folks. Great afternoon it is. Michigan. Someone named Clark is from Michigan is with us. Very, very good. Cass in Kentucky. Syrian. A Syrian is with us. Another Greek is with us. Tampa, Florida. Herb Bryant is with us. Welcome, Herb. Who else is with us today? Corona hotspot number 1, East Florida is with us. Hang in there. Michigan, Oman. Wow. A lot of viewers today. I did it in the afternoon, as I mentioned. Usually I do these lives at night, but in order to be nicer, St. George, Utah, Ron Waganer. In order to be nicer to my audience that is in places like Europe, I decided to do an afternoon live. I haven't done one of those in a long time. So I'm doing this afternoon live, and a lot of European folks are with us, right? The Australians are still sleeping. The Australians are still sleeping. Austin, Texas, George Kraft. The folks in China are still sleeping. The folks in Asia are still sleeping. But the Europeans, this afternoon, and the Middle Easterners, this is a much better time for them. We try to change it up. We try to not do things the same way every time. We try to change things up, change it up. So we're doing a Saturday conversation. We've got a very lovely list of super chats for me to go over. I will answer all those super chats. And then before we go, greetings from Poland, says Pitor. Very good, very, very good. Before we go, I will then read to you from City Builders and Vandals. We'll probably talk about a few more things, but there's a lot of super chats to get here. So if you have another super chat question, I will add it to the list. I am going to bang these out. Some of them I will spend more time on than others. But like I said, if you super chat me, you will get an answer. So let's just go. Let's boom, 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 boom. Another drink of unnamed diet beverage, and I will start booming through your super chats. Some I will give long answers to. Some I will give shorter answers. I'll try to give you a significant answer. You deserve it if you're super chatting me. But yeah, boom, 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 boom. All right, secular humanism. I believe the question came from Nicholas Lynch. Secular humanism. When I was growing up in Ohio, that was kind of the stronghold of, and the strong ears of the evangelical Christian right. And there was nothing they hated more than a, quote, secular humanist. What is a secular humanist? Good question. There is a magazine called Secular Humanist Magazine, and the people who subscribe to it would describe themselves as secular humanists. I believe secular humanism is a philosophy that believes that human beings are the center, that human strength and human brilliance is the center of history. And secular meaning that they don't believe that human beings, their brilliance comes from a higher power or from God. They are secular humanists. But for a long time, the secular humanists were it was a hated, it was just what the religious right was against. If you were a Satanist, if you were part of the gay agenda, you were a secular humanist. But, remember there was Humanist Magazine. I used to read Humanist Magazine at the public library. It was one of the few liberal magazines they had at the public library in my little town in Ohio. At my college, they had a club called the Atheist Humanist Association. And that secular humanism is just it is a non-religious philosophy. Basically, it's a skeptical philosophy that views human beings as the source of creativity and views religion as not being good. I think that's my understanding of secular humanism, and I'm not a secular humanist. I mean, I'm religious. I do believe that there is a God that is the creator of the universe, that enabled human beings to have their creativity, that gave human beings the ability to create and gave human beings a higher form of essence and being, a higher ability, that human beings do have a soul. They're not simply governed by pain and pleasure and their biological human desires, that humans have a higher state of being. So I'm not a secular humanist, but I respect secular humanists, and probably most Marxists would fall into the secular humanist camp. Marx himself was an atheist, and the Marxist tradition is hard materialism. But, like I mentioned, I do believe in God. I am a Christian. I'm not an evangelical. I'm not even a member of any church at this point. But, I do have a Christian outlook on the world. I was brought up in a Christian church, and I do believe that hard materialism is a problem. If America does become a socialist country, how do we prevent counter-revolution? From religious groups. Well, all right, writing it down. Revolution. Religious groups. So that answered the question about secular humanism. COVID denialism. Yeah, unbelievable. I don't know if folks saw the rant by the young woman in Florida. She was bonkers. She got up there and she sounded bonkers to me. The deep state. Are you part of the deep state? Because you're going down. I don't know if people have seen the rant. It went viral. You should all be locked up in an asylum. You're all crazy. But a lot of people think that she's brilliant. A lot of people think that rant about why children shouldn't have to wear masks and why Bill Gates is a pedophile and a lot of people think that rant was very brilliant. And it shows that there are increasingly two different narratives in this country. People don't see eye to eye. COVID denialism, people who think it's all a big hoax, that's widespread in the United States of America right now. And there's a lot of business owners that would like to promote that idea. But yeah, this is the situation. I'm not a COVID denialist at all. COVID-19 is real. I as somebody who lives in New York City, there are people I know. I haven't had any contact with them. I'm not stupid, but there are people that have been affected by this, right? People that are in my Facebook community, people that I had met long before this pandemic ever happened. Yes, I can attest to the fact that COVID-19 is a reality. It's happening. It's not a hoax. It's not fake. And the fact that so many Americans think it is really, really, really sad. And I can guarantee you something else. The notion that COVID-19 is a hoax was not invented by Russia, was not invented by China, was not invented by a foreign power. It was invented by domestic people in the United States, right? And don't try to blame this on, they're already doing this. Oh, the fact that so many Americans think that COVID-19 is a hoax, it's all because of Russia. No, it's not because of Russia. I can guarantee you, Russia takes this very seriously. Good friend of mine lives in Russia. They take COVID-19 very seriously over there. They have been taking huge measures to prevent it from, so Russia does not think COVID-19 is a hoax. And the idea that COVID-19 is a hoax has nothing to do, it is not a foreign conspiracy. It is the action of very, very dumb capitalists in the United States who want to keep their profits rolling in and don't care about public health and are concerned about the economy being shut down. And I think that there are many capitalists in the United States who don't like Amazon having a monopoly, are afraid of the smaller businesses being shut down, it's now Freemasons. Joanne thinks that the Roman stuff comes from Freemasons. We'll talk about Freemasonry. It's worth discussing. I'm actually going to answer that. And that probably had a role in it. I don't think it's necessarily because of that, but Freemasonry and U.S. history. I'm writing it down, Joanne. That's a very good super chat and question. It's something I'd love to talk about. So COVID denialism, yes, it's homegrown insanity here in the United States, spawned by capitalists that are bleeding and going out of business due to the pandemic. That's where it came from. And no international actor all around the world, people aren't that stupid. COVID denialism is a homegrown brand of insanity in the United States. All right, the consequences of U.S. collapse. Yeah. Well, we're living with the consequences of U.S. collapse right now. Whole regions of this country are economically devastated. I went over that a lot. I think the person asked that before I did my whole speech, my opening speech. So, yes, the consequences of U.S. collapse are all around us. It's a disaster. And if the United States just continues to further collapse, it's only going to make things worse. We don't turn things around. We don't make the choice. we don't turn things around in the United States, if we just continue to go further into this cycle of collapse, it's only going to get worse. People keep telling us, it's kind of sad. On the left, there's this fear that we're going to have fascism in the United States. Well, I think we're not going to have fascism. We're going to have anarchy. We're going to have barbarism. Fascism is particularly vulgar, and I think people have asked about that. If I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to talk about what fascism is. But right now, I don't think the American capitalist class is capable of really even organizing fascism. We're just going to have continual barbaric anarchy and collapse and division. I feel like the period that we're in, the ruling class is so weak and pathetic and confused and divided, they're not even capable of effectively pulling off fascism. If Donald Trump were a fascist, he'd be shooting people for going outside right now. He'd be, arresting COVID deniers. He would be using this opportunity to build his wall even bigger and set up concentration camps for immigrants. And if Trump were a fascist, fascists respond to situations like this by bringing the hammer down, right? Trump has responded to this as a complete buffoon. I'm just telling you, if Trump were actually a fascist, he would have responded to this crisis by, implementing a fascist state. Instead, he responded to this crisis by, making things even worse, by being even less organized. I'm just telling you, the right wing in the United States and the U.S. ruling class is so confused and divided. I think we're just going to see more chaos and instability. I almost feel like we are not even, the ruling class in the United States isn't organized and effective enough to pull off an effective fascism. Okay, consequences of the U.S. collapse. All right, 5 countries where revolution will happen in the next few years. I can't answer that. I really can't answer that. There are trends in the world that I'm optimistic about. There are many trends in the world that I'm optimistic about. And I think that Bolivarianism points toward the fact that when these crises emerge, factions emerge and coalitions take place. I'm excited about Scottish independence. I'm excited about the labor movement. I'm excited about democratic socialism and the rise of interest in socialism in the Western countries. There's a lot of positive things going on around the world, no doubt about it. But predicting quote unquote revolution in the next 5 years, I can't do it. I can't list a number of countries where revolution is going to happen in the next 5 years because I can't read I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball. There are some things that, yes, I've seen coming. What do you think of Adolf Reed Jr.? I don't know who that is. So I can't tell you about that. I'm sorry, Red. I just don't know who Adolf Reed Jr. is. But yeah, 5 countries. I can't do it. Can't do it, Dan Uko. Sorry. Wish I could give you an answer, but I'm not giving you the answer you want. I don't know 5 countries where I can guarantee you in the next 5 years there will be a revolution. I think a number of countries are moving in a socialist direction now, and I think there's going to be great upheaval. But I can't give you 5 countries. So there you go. All right. The LGBT employment ruling from the Supreme Court. I'm opposed to discrimination. If people are LGBT and they want to be employed, their employer should not be able to discriminate against them on that basis. The fact that there is going to be less discrimination against LGBT people, I think is a good thing. I am opposed to discrimination against people for being LGBT. If people are LGBT, that is their own personal business. One's sexuality, who one loves, who one chooses to marry or to be related to, that's their business. Here in the United States, we have the separation of church and state. We don't have a religious government here in the United States. And, that's all there is to it. I think that discrimination against people on the basis of their sexual orientation is not correct. It's not something we should condone as a society. Now, if someone is conservative personally, if someone's religion, if they're a Christian or a Muslim or an Orthodox Jew, or they don't approve of homosexuality, that's their right as well. They have the right to not approve of that, but that doesn't give them the right to discriminate against someone else, right? Just because you don't agree with homosexuality. Jacob Maxey, Russian Constitution. Got it. All right, writing it down. Just because you don't agree, with homosexuality doesn't give you the right to impose on somebody else. You know, I don't know if folks remember. I'll just say this. This is just an observation. You know, there was that clerk in Indiana. I forget her name. She was famous for like 10 minutes. And she wouldn't issue a gay marriage license. Do you remember this? What was her name? The lady in Indiana wouldn't give a gay marriage license. She was religious. And I look at that case. I can't remember her name. You know, and there was all this sympathy with her. Oh, what a heroic woman. No, look at the video. Right? The gay couple comes in. They want their marriage certificate. She's like, leave the building. Get out of here. Kim Davis. That was her name. Thanks, somebody in the chat. And it's like, you know, if Kim Davis, here's the thing, and it was in Kentucky. Okay, I thought it was Indiana. Well, if Kim Davis hadn't gone, leave the building, if Kim Davis had just said to that couple, you know what, I personally, my faith doesn't allow me to do this. You know, perhaps somebody else here at the office could fill out the form for you, but just like a Muslim or a Jew who doesn't eat pork, or just like a Mormon who doesn't drink alcohol, you know, I personally can't participate, you know, because of my faith in this, but here are some other people who will do it, and I hope you understand, you know, you have your beliefs, I have mine. If she had just been respectful to that couple and said, I personally can't help you, but some other people can, it would have been fine, and nothing would have happened. She couldn't do that, right? And so people want to make her into a martyr. Oh, she stuck up for her faith. Bullshit. She treated them like criminals. You know, that gay couple that walked into her office. Get out of here. Leave the building. I mean, she's an awful, despicable person. Despicable. You know? I'm sorry. You know, I mean, yes, it's true. There are people whose religious beliefs prevent them from doing certain things, right? You know, that, you know, there might be food inspectors who, you know, maybe they have to inspect some pork and they're Jewish or Muslims. They put their gloves on before they inspect the pork because that's their religion. You don't touch pork. You know, I mean, if she was willing to just say, my personal faith doesn't allow me to issue this gay marriage license, so I'm going to have this other person do it. I'm going to go in the other room, but I respect your right to your beliefs and mine, the Supreme Court. That's not what she did. That is not what she did. So Kim Davis, scum in my view. You don't treat people like that, you know? I mean, her job was to issue marriage licenses. The Supreme Court said gay marriage had to be legal. And she then responded to a gay couple who wanted to get their marriage license by treating them like criminals. And that's the same, again, if there's an employer who personally is opposed to homosexuality, and one of their employees is gay, and they say, well, you have every right to be gay. I personally don't approve of homosexuality, but you can work here, and as long as you can do your job, that's fine. Fine. But if the employer says, you're gay, that's against this company policy, I'm going to take your job away from... No, not acceptable. I am opposed to discrimination against people on the basis of their LGBT orientation or status or whatnot. So there you go. There you go. I mean, that's all there is to it. And, again, if people have religious beliefs and they're opposed to this kind of thing, they have that right as well, right? And I'm not in favor of discrimination against people on the basis of their religious beliefs, right? And that I would not be in favor of forcing people to violate their own moral conscience, right? I wouldn't be in favor of a law that forced Kim Davis herself to I wouldn't be in favor of the police, grabbing her hand and forcing her to fill out the paperwork, But at the same time, look at that. Look at the tape of how she responded to that gay couple. I'm sorry, not acceptable behavior. I'm against discrimination. Hope that answered the question. Karl Marx, racist. Now, I haven't read the book, Karl Marx, Racist, but I've read many articles making that allegation, that Karl Marx was himself racist. And honestly, some of the things that people point to as examples that Karl Marx is racist are BS, and some of the things that they point to are legitimate. So let's talk about some of the things that are BS. There was a word that Karl Marx used in one of his essays. Translated into English, it sounds really offensive. It was actually in a letter he wrote to Engels, but actually in German at the time, that was not considered to be a racial slur. But if someone said it in English, obviously it would be. There's other things like that. There's a quote where he's asked about societies that are not fully socialist. And he says these societies will perish in the fire of revolution. And people say, oh, he's advocating genocide. No, he's not advocating genocide. He's saying that, that societies that are not fully capitalist yet, as the socialist revolution happens, they will be absorbed into socialism. He's not advocating genocide. So people say that he advocated genocide against Scottish Highlanders. False. That's not what he said. He said that these societies will perish and be adopted into socialism. That's not what he said. People who say he used racial language in that one particular essay in German, not exactly. But the other thing, though, there are some things that Marx did that were offensive. He was Eurocentric. Marx believed that Western capitalism was the most advanced system in the world, and that socialism would first come into the West, and that when the British, for example, were colonizing India, Karl Marx supported it, arguing that they were bringing capitalism to India, which was more advanced than what was there before, and it would eventually bring socialism to India. Marx believed that Western capitalism going around the world was progressive. Well, he's wrong. He was wrong about that. He didn't predict the rise of imperialism. And in the final years of Marx's life, he started to realize he was wrong. His writings, for example, on the Irish question reflected an understanding, right? If he had stuck to his original principles, he would have argued that Britain colonizing the Irish people was an advance because it was bringing capitalism to them. But in the final years of his life, his writing on the Irish question, you see him understanding that the British are not industrializing Ireland, that they're keeping Ireland poor. So he starts to understand that in the final years of his life. And yes, Karl Marx in the final years even kind of admits that Irish nationalism is a good thing. So Karl Marx's views on this idea that colonialism was somehow progressive are rolled back. Karl Marx is very, very, it starts to change on that. The Mexican-American War, right? Great example. Karl Marx believed that the United States taking over Texas and California from Mexico was somehow progressive. But a number of American Marxists told him that it wasn't, that the Spanish-American or the Mexican-American War was actually the most reactionary part of the United States, the slave plantation system expanding. It was slave expansionism. And Marx actually, is corrected. And Frederick Engels, I believe, disagreed with Marx on the question of the Mexican-American War. Abraham Lincoln said the Mexican-American War was wrong. Ulysses S. Grant said it was wrong. Many American progressives said that the Mexican-American War, the seizing of Mexico and the Old Southwest and all of that, was done to expand slavery, and it was wrong. And that Mexico at the time had more of a progressive, the Mexican government was actually more progressive than the slave system in the South. And so Marx was wrong about that, right? And Marx, I think, he was absolutely wrong about the Mexican-American War. And other Marxists called him out on it. There's the infamous essay that he wrote, on the Jewish question when he was young, that many people look at that and find that very offensive. So, there's things that you can say about Karl Marx that, I'm sure you can point to Karl Marx doing things that were racist, doing things that were inappropriate. I just listed all of them. So if you want to have a list of things that Marx did wrong, I gave you a list of things: supporting colonialism, supporting the Mexican-American War, the essay on the Jewish question. There's things that Marx did that were offensive, but Marxism as a movement was on the right side of history. Karl Marx, let's remember that Karl Marx was a huge champion of the struggle to abolish slavery in the United States. And he did so much within Britain to stand arm in arm with the workers of the United States and with the enslaved people of the United States to fight against slavery. The First International was key in that. He said labor in white skin can't be free when labor in black skin is branded. And that Marxists in the United States played a huge role in the defeat of slavery. You can talk about Workers of the World Unite and his call for an end to national chauvinism. There are many things about Marx that are the opposite. I would say Marx's life story is overwhelmingly a story of fighting for the rights of women, fighting for the rights of different, racial minorities, and calling for workers to unite and calling for an end to special stigmatization and oppression of workers. But yes, Marx didn't understand colonialism, and he didn't understand that eventually capitalism would move into its monopoly stage of imperialism. He didn't understand that. And on that basis, he was confused. So some of the things that people say about Marx being racist are BS, but some of them are true. And the Marxist movement has corrected him on it. So I think I've answered that question. I haven't read the particular book the person cited, but there you go. All right, how did the Black Panthers fund their survival programs? They got donations from a lot of people. I know one thing the Black Panthers did is they sold the Little Red Book. You can watch video of how they would sell the Little Red Book up and down the college campuses because at the time there was kind of this new left hippie culture where Mao, it was like having a book by Mao. Mao was bad. Media said he was bad. So if you were a baby boomer college kid and there was somebody selling, there was a black activist in a military uniform who was selling, the Mao's Little Red Book. They made lots of money. I mean, there's videos of Bobby Seale and others talking about selling the Little Red Book to raise money. I'm actually, in my book, City Builders and Vandals, there's a section where I read from the donations appeal that the Black Panthers made for the free breakfast program. And I talk about it. And, there were a lot of wealthy people, celebrities who admired the Black Panthers. John Lennon of the Beatles donated a lot of money to the Black Panthers. Who's the guy who was in the Godfather? What's his name? He was the actor who was in the Godfather. I can't remember his name. He donated a lot of money to the Black Panthers. Can't remember his name. What was his name? He donated a lot of money to the Black Panthers. I can't remember his name. Marlon Brando. Thank you. See, there's always somebody in the chat who knows what they're talking about. Marlon Brando gave a lot of money to the Black Panthers. And there's many celebrities that Jane Fonda, I think, donated quite a bit of money to the Black Panthers. A lot of money was donated to the Black Panthers by celebrities. People thought they were inspiring. And that's one thing about the Black Panthers that a lot of activists don't get is that when the Black Panthers started, they were a very, very small group. But what made them grow so rapidly was their use of the media because they dressed in military uniforms, they carried guns, they looked badass, right? They walked into the state capitol in California, which was legal at that time, with their open carry shotguns or whatever, not legal anymore, but they got a lot of media for the attention for themselves. And a lot of people all over the country looked at the Black Panthers, all over the world really, looked at the Black Panthers and said, sexy. You know what I mean? And thought that was just the coolest, most badass thing. And people all over the world saw images of them on TV and were like, these people are badass. Gaddafi gave a lot of money to the Black Panthers, right? The Libyan, I've heard stories of the Libyan missions, the Libyan consulates in the United States. Somebody would show up in a suit, there'd be a Libyan guy, knock on the Black Panthers office. They're like, this is for you, in broken English. And they'd open it up and it would be a suitcase just full of thousands and thousands of dollars in cash, right? And that Gaddafi personally arranged for the Libyan government to give millions of dollars to the Black Panthers. It was funded by a lot of different people. Now, there's some people that allege that a protection racket was used. That's a widespread allegation I've heard. I've never seen proof of it, but I've heard people claim it's true. I've heard other people claim it's not true. I've heard people allege that they protected supermarkets. I've heard that allegation that they operated in neighborhoods where there were a lot of gangs and stuff like that. So they would do kind of a protection racket where they protected supermarkets from criminals. And if you didn't, I've heard that allegation, never seen proof, but I've heard people who are not anti-communist make the claim, but I've also never heard, I've heard people strongly dispute that claim. So I wouldn't stand by that claim. There's a lot of literature out there, but yeah, I think their main source of funding was sympathetic people, because you have to remember at that time, there were millions of people in the United States that were mobilized into anti-racist protests. There were millions of people around the world who admired the Black Liberation Movement in the United States. So yeah, they probably got funding from a lot of different sources. Is it possible that in some areas somebody did something nefarious? Maybe. And that's not right. I don't condone any illegal activity. I don't condone people breaking the law. So there you go. Alrighty. All right, Belarus today. Right. Well, Belarus I would maintain is a socialist country. But right now, just like China in the 70s, Belarus has entered an alliance with the U.S. imperialists. They're having some kind of fight with Russia. I don't even know what it's about, right? Russia and Belarus usually have gotten along pretty well. In the last couple years, something between Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, and the Russian government, there's some kind of falling out. And based on that, Belarus is entered an alliance with the U.S. imperialists. I I'm disappointed by that. There's a lot of things about Belarus. I maintain Belarus is a socialist country, right? I mean, they didn't dismantle socialism. The president, Lukashenko, is an admirer of the Soviet Union. The Communist Party is the biggest party in the government. The industries are all state-run. They never implemented austerity. The means of production are still organized. I mean, I would maintain that Belarus is a socialist society, right? They call it the last Soviet republic. The CIA has been trying to overthrow them for years, but now I don't know why. And I've met with people from Belarus. I've met with Belarusian folks. I met with them at the World Festival of Youth and Students. I know other people. There's a very good book about Lukashenko. It's called The Last Soviet Republic. I would recommend ordering it. It's a very, very good book that goes over Belarus's history and how Belarus is currently organized. But unfortunately, yeah, at this point they've entered kind of an alliance with the U.S. imperialists against Russia, and I don't condone that. I think that anti-imperialism is the way to go. But that doesn't change the class character. In the 70s, when China, and the Gang of Four made their strategic alliance with the U.S. imperialists, that was not a good thing to do. I don't support imperialism, but that didn't change China. That didn't make China capitalist, right? And that sometimes socialist countries will make opportunist moves that are not right. So yeah, that's my position basically. Belarus is a socialist country. I don't condone their alliance with Western capitalism against Russia right now. And you'll notice that because of that, all of a sudden it's okay to say good things about them, right? If you ever said anything good about Belarus's economy, you would be attacked, right? In 2006, when the U.S. CIA was trying to stage a color revolution there, it was, Lukashenko's a dictator, evil regime, but now, and you'll notice this, U.S. media is so obviously manipulated and controlled by powerful capitalist interests. It's so obvious, right? In 2006, if you'd have said anything good about Belarus, they'd have been like, oh, God, that's propaganda for the evil regime. But now, Bloomberg News ran a great article about, Belarus, their socialist economy is kind of working. Well, yeah, it's working now because, yeah, it's so obvious, right? That now, all of a sudden, Belarus has been doing well, right? In the 90s, when the rest of the Soviet Union was falling, Belarus had stability and didn't have all the problems. Belarus has continued to see economic growth. It's taken care of its population. You never were allowed to say that. But now that Lukashenko is entered this alliance with the imperialists, now that he's anti-Russian and anti-Chinese and aligned with the Americans, because of that, all of a sudden, U.S. media has noticed all the good things Lukashenko has done. And it shows how opportunist our media is, how completely opportunist and manipulative our media is. So there you go. So folks, before I go on to the rest of the super chats, because we got a lot, feel free to keep sending them. I'll keep answering the super chats. But if you haven't done it already, be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to share this on Facebook, on Reddit, on Twitter, all the places, right? We want to make this a bigger conversation. The more people who watch, the more fun we have. So tweet this out, share this, right? We want to have a good conversation here. Make this a bigger conversation. Yeah, I'm having a good time. Someone said, please make more pro-Caleb memes on Twitter. Yeah, I love memes like that. George Galloway shared a meme of me, a Virgin Vosh versus Chad Maupin meme. Did you see that? I thought that was hilarious. I did not expect him to share that. So if you make a meme of me, it might go viral because I'm friends with people who might share them. So if you want to meme what we talk about, but you don't have to meme me personally. Why don't you meme some of our slogans? We need a government of action to fight for working families. Those 11 words need to be everywhere. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Share those words everywhere. Get those words out there, right? Meme the concepts that we talk about, right? All right. Tucker Carlson. What do I think of Tucker Carlson? Well, I watch Tucker Carlson sometimes, and I'm horrified. I'm horrified by some of the stuff he says. When he describes the Bronx, one of the poorest counties in the United States, a lot of immigrants, communities that are very poor and suffering, and he speaks about them like they're diseased, like it's almost like Nazi propaganda about ethnic groups they didn't like. It's vile. Some of the stuff he says, but Tucker Carlson, to be fair, on international issues, he will allow people like my friend Dakota Lilly, a good friend of mine, to go on. He'll allow people like Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil to go on his show and argue with him about Venezuela and stuff. It's a mixed bag. He's a little bit better on international issues, but the way he talks about domestic issues is vile. So I don't endorse his views. But he shows a trend that there is increasingly right-wing populism in the United States. There is increasingly right-wing populism. His book, The Ship of Fools, is critical of capitalism. There's an argument he had with Ben Shapiro where he opposes self-driving cars, and he says the market isn't always the solution. And it shows that many people in right-wing circles are open to more criticism of capitalism, and that many people that are in conservative areas are more open to criticism of capitalism. So it's worth paying attention to Tucker Carlson. He said some things about Syria that I think are very good. So he's complicated. He's a complicated figure. He's not the kind of guy I would ever go hang out with and have a beer with. And, I'm not going to go over to his house and go hunting and fishing with him on the weekends. But he's worth paying attention to because he's a wild card. Anybody who's a wild card in the United States is worth paying attention to. There's more diversity of opinion on Tucker Carlson's show than on Rachel Maddow's show. No question about it. All right. Why was China against socialism in Afghanistan? Well, for the simple reason that 1961, let's go back to 1961. You'll remember that in 1961, very famously, the Soviet Union cut ties with China. And the Soviet Union cut off economic aid to China, cut its support for China. So for the first 6 or 7 years after that, China tried to be ultra-communist and ultra-anti-imperialist and ultra-revolutionary. And Lin Biao, and they eventually launched the Cultural Revolution. And the response of China was to be, okay, well, the Soviet Union cut ties. We're going to prove we're more communist than them. That didn't go so well, right? The Great Leap Forward economically didn't work out so well. And about 1969, China started aligning with the U.S. imperialists. First in Angola. Angola was the first place they started aligning with them, but then they supported Pinochet, and, China's foreign policy shifted during the 70s to aligning with U.S. imperialism. It was started by Khrushchev. Khrushchev, by cutting ties with China, it started with Khrushchev, but then, China started aligning with Western capitalism in response to it. And it took him a while to do that. That was painful because Mao was a revolutionary. He didn't want to do that. But the Gang of Four, it was really the Gang of Four who started that policy. The Gang of Four, after the fall of Lin Biao was the creator of the Cultural Revolution. He was a general who was aligned with Mao. After Lin Biao mysteriously disappeared, it was alleged he tried to flee to the Soviet Union. He was basically accused of being a Soviet agent, Lin Biao. After Lin Biao's fall, when the Gang of Four took over and were running things in the last years of Mao's life, Richard Nixon was invited to China and treated as a hero in China and given a hero's welcome. And China started basically working with the CIA around the world against Soviet-aligned communist parties. And Chinese foreign policy took a dramatic shift to the right. And yes, there was the rise of Deng Xiaoping. There was the Kampuchea War, where China invaded Vietnam. And, that was a period where China, because it had been hurt by the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union had devastated China economically by cutting off its aid and all of that, China pivoted to supporting U.S. imperialism, kind of like what Belarus is doing now. Belarus had a falling out with Russia, so they've pivoted to supporting U.S. imperialism. And socialist countries do that sometimes, and it's not good. I'm not in favor of doing that. I am not in favor of socialist countries becoming allies with the imperialists. But you have to remember, these socialist countries, you must remember that socialist states, are trying to survive. They're trying to maintain their socialist system in a sea of capitalism, under siege of Western capitalism. And sometimes, in those moments, it becomes necessary for them to make an alliance, and work, and it's in their interest as a country, but it's not in the interest of the global revolution overall. And I think it's not in the interest of socialism overall, but it's in the interest of their country in the short term. And, we have to sympathize. Countries around the world that are trying to build socialism under hostile conditions, especially very, very poor countries like Libya, like Cuba, countries that are very small, they sometimes make opportunistic decisions for their own reasons. And that doesn't mean you have to just completely, that doesn't mean they're evil. It just means that they've done something that maybe we wouldn't do. Someone says Caleb, more like Caleb. Okay, well, whatever. Sometimes socialist countries, they do things that those of us who are activists, those of us who believe in socialism and go around promoting socialism in Western countries wouldn't do. Um, so that's all there is to it. Um, and I think it's important for socialists not to be agents of any country, right? And I think that I gave a class you can watch called Mao and American Socialists, where I talked about how China's foreign policy really confused a lot of American activists. And the new communist movement of the 1970s, because it was so closely tied to China, went nuts. And it caused them a lot of problems. Socialists, you can support existing socialist countries, but there's no need, you're not puppets of them, right? You can disagree with them, right? And that's an important thing, that socialists should not be agents. They should not be blind apologists and blind supporters of any socialist country around the world. And that's important, right? That socialists in the United States should maintain an independent perspective. While they recognize and defend socialism and refute the lies of the imperialists, they shouldn't become blind apologists for any regime, and they shouldn't be puppets of a regime. And that the relationship, let me add, the relationship that the Maoist groups in the 70s had, the relationship that the Maoist groups in the 70s had with China really hurt them. So, in my class on Mao and American Socialists, I talk about this. So I think that's important, I'm not an agent of Belarus. And when Belarus does what I think is not right, I say, you know what, Belarus, I don't agree with what they're doing. End of story, right? China, I think, is playing a very, very good role internationally now. But in the 70s, they played a very bad role. We can admit that. I think that the Soviet Union, when it cut ties with China, when it isolated China, it hurt China economically and created the Sino-Soviet split, that was no good. That's okay. You can be critical of what socialist countries do, but defend their existence. And I think that's the important thing. And yeah, China's role in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s was bad, very, very bad. And they're suffering the consequences now, right? I mean, the Uyghur stuff, that's all the problems they're having in the Uyghur regions are basically the long-term consequence of their cooperation with the U.S. imperialists in Afghanistan. So there you go. What do you think about Egyptian intervention in Libya? Well, here's the thing about Libya, right? So Libya, until 2011, was a prosperous socialist country. Gaddafi built the highest, the world's largest irrigation system. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. Amazing things were done. Socialism was torn apart in 2011 by the revolution that a lot of stupid leftists supported. But it was a U.S. imperialist destabilization, color revolution. 2011, Gaddafi was overthrown. You can actually buy on Amazon US, Amazon UK, Amazon Europe. You can buy, I have published, the Center for Political Innovation has published the Green Book, China, Myanmar, Rohingya. I published my own edition of the Green Book, Gaddafi's Green Book, with an introduction where I talk about Libya and what I learned from the Libyan War and how Libya was key in my political development and the development of the Center for Political Innovation. So get your copy today. It's $7 on Amazon, not expensive. Where I talk, it's the Green Book. And people around the country are distributing this Green Book edition. So Libya is very important. So that's what happened. So now, speed up to today. There are two governments in Libya. Right, there's the provisional government that was established by the U.S. imperialists after the overthrow of Gaddafi, and there's General Haftar, who's a military man. He was somebody who was in Gaddafi's government, who was viewed as kind of a rival of Gaddafi or whatever. Now he controls a chunk of the country also, and the two governments are fighting each other. The Haftar military government versus the provisional government set up by the United States, and they're fighting. And there's talk of Egypt militarily intervening. Al-Sisi, who's the military leader who is in power in Egypt now, he toppled Morsi. Mohammed Morsi was the Muslim Brotherhood guy who got elected. The Al-Sisi government in Egypt is considering military intervention in Libya because Libya is on their border. They probably want stability in Libya, right? The instability that has been brought on by the U.S. destabilization of Libya. So, there's contradictions, right? I think that many people in Libya probably support Haftar, because they think it'll bring stability, right? They see that government, the provisional government set up by the U.S. imperialists, they see that as a government that is highly unstable. Now, Haftar, he doesn't seem to be an anti-imperialist. He doesn't seem to be a socialist. Maybe he is, but I think they see him as someone who will bring stability to the country. He's a military strong man. He was a hero, a military hero under Gaddafi, but now, he doesn't agree with socialism anymore. But I think some people in Libya view him as bringing more stability to the country. I think that's what's going on. But I'm not saying Haftar is good. I'm not, I certainly don't support the provisional government of the U.S. imperialists. I think this is just a crisis. Briefly there was a group that was pro DPRK that took power in like one region in Libya and was like overthrown. So it's complicated. I don't endorse Haftar. I don't endorse the provisional government. It's a mess. Libya is a mess. That's what you need to understand. The overthrow of socialism in Libya has resulted in a disaster. When Libya was a socialist country, people from all over Africa were trying to get into Libya. Gaddafi had a program where if you were African and you went to Libya, he would give you a job. Millions of Africans went to Libya to get a job, right? Now, someone's saying Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Gaddafi, supports Haftar. Okay, well, that would lead me to have a more positive view, but I'm holding out. I'm looking at the situation, but regardless, under socialism, people were trying to get into Libya. Millions of Africans were trying to get into Libya. Under capitalism, now that at the barrel of a gun, the U.S. imperialists, Wall Street, Western imperialism has forced Libya to become a free market country. It's a disaster. And terrorist groups have set up shop. There's mass poverty and suffering. So capitalism has been a disaster in Libya. That's what you need to learn from the crisis right now, right? And Egypt probably wants to, thinks it's in its interest to stabilize it. Many people think Haftar is a good guy, and people are telling me in the chat that, al-Islam Gaddafi supports him and stuff, but I'm holding off. I'm waiting, right? I'm not ready to give Haftar, my full blessing. I'm just looking at the situation and looking at the results of Western imperialism destroying a socialist country. Socialism is better than capitalism, and Libya, the history of Libya is a great example of that. It was dirt poor under capitalism. Socialism made it rich, and capitalism made it poor again. Now, I was asked about Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. It's a great book. It draws heavily from Lenin. It talks about neocolonialism and the regimes that U.S. imperialism was setting up. It's a very good Cold War book for understanding how U.S. imperialism operated during the Cold War. And many people believe that the CIA's moves against Kwame Nkrumah, that those moves were actually motivated specifically by that book. How will the U.S. collapse affect world politics? Okay. Writing it down. Okie dokie. Alrighty. So someone was kicked out of the Labor Party, it says, because they tweeted out that Israel trains the U.S. police. Well, let's remember they started that whole witch hunt. That whole witch hunt was started against Jeremy Corbyn, claiming that Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic. And no matter what Jeremy Corbyn said, because Jeremy Corbyn had a record of supporting the Palestinians and being critical of Israel, because of that, they insisted that Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic. It's a fact. It is a fact that U.S. police forces are trained in Israel. That's a fact. You cannot like it, but it's a fact. And that a lot of the way U.S. police forces operate, they're very brutal, is similar to the way Israeli police forces operate when dealing with Palestinians. That's a fact. That is a fact, okay? But the fact that you're not allowed to say that increasingly shows, again, that this hysteria around, if you don't support Israel, you're an anti-Semite, you're therefore a neo-Nazi. That hysteria. Now, he hasn't said it. Vosh claims to be critical of Israel, but give it time. I could imagine the Vosh guy who claims that if you don't condemn China up and down and repeat every allegation against China about Uyghurs, you're a Nazi. I can see him making that claim that, you're a Nazi, right? And that you have to vote for Joe Biden because Trump is a Nazi, right? I mean, that milieu of people that it's like everyone we don't agree with is a fascist, and they have these charts and graphs to prove that half of the people that are leftists are all fascists. that milieu, I can totally see them running a mile with it. And the British Labour Party, they have done this against Jeremy Corbyn, right? Jeremy Corbyn opposed anti-Semitism. He was pro-Palestine, but he was very critical of anti-Semitism. Didn't matter, right? And some of the stuff, let me mind you, some of the stuff that was said against Jeremy Corbyn was particularly disturbing. There were leaders of the British Labour Party who said that anti-capitalism is anti-Semitic. That rich and capitalist is code for Jew. There was actually an article published by Jonah Goldberg, who's the editor of National Review magazine, very prominent conservative in the United States. He wrote the book Liberal Fascism, called Karl Marx's Jew-hating conspiracy theory. And it alleges that Marxism is anti-Semitic. And he even goes back to like ancient Greece. He argues that any criticism of capitalism is anti-Semitic. Right? And we're going to see this. This is going to rise. I see this coming more and more in increasing years because Israel has become so much more aligned with the right wing in the West than the left wing. When Israel began, it tried to tell everyone it was a socialist country. It was a socialist commune in the desert. It was just a bunch of kibbutz, and they were going to sing Kumbaya, and the Palestinians love them, and everyone loves them. And all of those lies and all of that deception, was pretty soon revealed that Israel was a racist British colonial settler state. When that happened, Israel is now increasingly more and more aligned with the right-wingers in the West, like Trump. So because of that, I think that Israel is positioning itself to be very, very anti-socialist. And so this idea that all anti-capitalism is anti-Semitic is going to rise. It's going to increasingly rise. And the attempt to equate Marxists with neo-Nazis like Vosh, and the CIA has been doing that for years, right? I mean, the CIA has been pushing that. That's this Congress for Cultural Freedom, Mary McCarthy, Hannah Arendt. That's been one of their talking points, that populism is fascism and left populism is fascism. That's a central plank of CIA synthetic leftism, right? Is that all populism is bad because it's fascist, and socialism just means radical individualism. That is a big point that the fake left, the synthetic left, has been trying to make for years. I think that's going to be increasing. The idea that if you oppose capitalism, that you're a Nazi, that's going to keep increasing. I think that kind of thing is going to be rising. We're going to hear a lot more of that in the coming years. So get ready for it. Get ready for it. Get ready for it, right? I mean, people claim I'm anti-Semitic, that I'm secretly somehow a fascist, which I'm not. People claim that Max Blumenthal is secretly a fascist. He's not. People claim Cynthia McKinney is a fascist, the Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. This whole, red-brown scare is going to increase. Why? Because people are going to want socialism. And so, this, SJW politics, where being a leftist just means you go around correcting people about using politically incorrect words, it's going to keep rising. And we're going to see this. I've seen the attacks. I've seen the attacks rising. Documents around the internet that list every leftist who opposes U.S. overthrow of the Syrian government and claiming that they're somehow a Nazi. This is rising, and that the game that these witch hunters play could be done to anybody, right? I'll tell you, folks, I, Caleb Maupin, admit that I appeared on a TV network that has many times platformed David Duke, CNN. That's right. In 2013, I appeared on CNN, and many times CNN has platformed David Duke. So according to these, I appear on Holocaust denier platforming TV network CNN. Right? I admit it. And you could say that about anybody who's ever appeared on CNN, right? Because CNN has platformed David Duke many, many times. They've done interviews with David Duke many times. Many, many times. And I have appeared on CNN, and many people have appeared on CNN. So anyone who's ever appeared on CNN, you could play this game with. You could say, and they appeared on Holocaust denial platforming network CNN. Right? Right? So therefore, right? I mean, and they do this. There's articles, like you could add a laugh track. You could add a laugh track to some of these claims. These people sit there and it's like 6 degrees of separation. But they have this blind spot for CNN, right? It never applies to CNN. It's like if you're connected to an anti-imperialist, right? They will RT bait you. They'll never CNN bait you. They'll press TV bait you. They'll never MSNBC bait you. And they have a blind spot for imperialism. And you look at these documents that these red-brown hunters come up with. They have a huge blind spot. Associating with CNN is never a problem, even though CNN has platformed Holocaust deniers. Associating with press TV is always a problem, right? Associating with MSNBC, never a problem. Shaking hands with Hillary Clinton, who murdered millions of people in Libya and supported the Iraq War, never a problem. But having a public debate with somebody who wrote a bunch of nasty racist stuff, oh my God, you're canceled. This red-brown scare is it's so obvious it's coming from the imperialists. It's so obvious where it's coming from. It's so obvious that it's not coming from well-intentioned people, okay? Because if that was the case, they would realize that everything they say about, people that they accuse of being red-browns applies to a lot more people that are mainstream, but they don't care about mainstream because they're trying to shut up leftists. And it's a demand. It's a demand. You can be a leftist in the United States. Yeah, you can be a leftist as long as you condemn every existing socialist country and align with U.S. imperialism around the world. That's basically what they're saying. You can be a leftist as long as you align with Western imperialism around the world, as long as you're not anti-imperialism, and as long as you're anti-populist, as long as your leftism is just, calling people racist and sexist and homophobic on Twitter. You're not talking about working families. You're not talking about infrastructure. You're not talking about jobs. As long as you just go around calling people racist, sexist, and homophobic on Twitter all day, and you hate all existing socialism, you can be a leftist. Wow, I must Blackjack Pinocchio gave me a huge super chat there. Much appreciated. But that's what the whole red-brown scare is really about. That's what it's all about. So just remember that that's what it's about. Okay. All right. Nazis directed command over private... Did Nazis direct command over private things in the economy? Nope. No, they didn't. No, they did not. No, they did not. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. No, they did not. Nazis did not direct private control over the economy. They did a couple things that were kind of like that. Like they built the Autobahns. They hired a lot of people to build the Autobahns. That was kind of an economic stimulus project. They restarted military spending and armaments production, which was kind of government spending. But the Nazi economy was largely based on the government spending money on military production and prisons. That was basically what the Nazi economy was. If you read, the best book I ever read about Nazi economics was called Hitler's Banker. And it was a biography of Hjalmar Schacht. And he was the Nazi economist. And he was a wealthy banker, a hugely wealthy German who was tied with Krupp and Thyssen, the German industrialists. They didn't like the American banks, and they didn't like that Germany had gotten in debt to American bankers and British bankers. They also hated communists because they wanted to unionize their factories and seize their property and control the economy. So the Nazis represented that strata of German industrial capitalists. German industrial capitalists who didn't like British and American bankers, getting them into debt, and they also didn't like communists. And it was that strata. The Nazi regime was Bonapartism. It was one section of the ruling class, the German industrialists, seizing power. And that's basically what happened, is that Germany, after World War I, the German industrialists had been beaten down. That's what happened. And so it took a long time, and they tried multiple times. Hitler was not the first attempt. There were many attempted military governments and dictators, and they failed a lot of times. They were toppled by leftist revolts, and there were many, coups attempting to overthrow the Weimar Republic. Hitler was the one who finally pulled it off. And if you read Mein Kampf by Hitler, what Hitler intended to do, if you read it, he was very open about what he intended to do. He said that the reason that the Kaiser in Germany couldn't defeat Marxism was because he defended the status quo, and that there needed to be a pseudo-revolutionary movement to defeat Marxism. Hitler admits this in Mein Kampf, that basically the failure to defeat Marxism was based on the fact that there was not a mass revolutionary movement created to defend capitalism. It was just defense of the status quo. So Hitler came up with Nazism, National Socialism, as a fake revolutionary movement to defend the status quo. And the brown shirts were an army of strike breakers who went around attacking labor unions and beating up communists, and eventually they created this pseudo, revolutionary sounding movement to defeat communists. And then when they came to power, they killed all the people who actually believed in it. All the people who actually believed in National Socialism, they killed them. It was just a facade. The Nazis were a counter gang. And then they had this problem after they took power that some of the people in their rank and file actually believed in Nazism. So they killed Strasser, they killed Ernst Rem, and they killed all the people who actually believed in the shit that they promoted. They killed them. And then they just created a military government, a military state. There was nothing socialist about National Socialism. And even the people who believed that there was something socialist about it got killed. So, yeah, I mean, they presented themselves as if they were socialists who were hating Jews. It was like, you can still be racist, you can still be anti-Semitic, and still hate communists and be a socialist. That was kind of their message, right? Is that we're this socialistic movement of bigoted people, and it's like this special kind of like national socialism. And they gradually, as they approached taking power, stopped believing that even. They were, and Hitler started saying basically that, oh yeah, we don't really believe in socialism, don't worry. They took power, and then they killed, on the night of the long knives, anyone who actually believed in the shit that they preached. So yeah, there was nothing socialist about Nazism. And I read, you should read an article I wrote about populism for Mint Press News. I wrote a history of populism. And I talked about this. And, the Nazi state was it was an attempt of the right wing to co-opt populism. And there was nothing socialist about it. Now, one thing that has been pointed out, and I think this is interesting, is that after World War I, the German public was subject to a lot of humiliation and degradation. And, that there was, they weren't allowed to have an army. The Versailles Treaty, they were forced to pay reparations. And the Social Democrats, the fake, socialists, the Social Democrats supported the Versailles Treaty and paying reparations and the national humiliation of Germans following World War I. The Communist Party opposed it. They opposed what was done to the Germans. They said, why should the working class have to pay for a war created by German capitalists? They said it was wrong to make German factory workers and German working class people pay reparations for a war that they didn't want to fight. Not only had they been forced to fight this war by the capitalists, but then they also were forced to pay reparations for it. And there was a feeling that was wrong. But I think that the communists, because of their opposition to all forms of nationalism, they made the mistake of not sympathizing. There were many Germans who felt attacked on the basis of being German after World War I. They felt like they were being degraded as a nation. They felt like they, as Germans, were being humiliated. And the Nazis played into that. And the communists, because communists tend to oppose all nationalism and such, the communists never really said to workers, Germany is the country of Bach and Mozart. Germany is the country where Karl Marx existed. And they never would let Germans be proud to be German. And that was a mistake, I think. And that mistake created an opening for the Nazis, and I think that the anti-nationalism of the KPD was a bit of a mistake, and that by being so vehemently anti-nationalistic, that the German Communist Party created an opening and basically handed the history of German civilization over to the far right and to the Nazis. And that was a mistake, right? That the world was telling Germany, you can't be proud to be German because of World War I. And a lot of Germans said, I am proud to be German, right? Their German nationalism was a big thing. It was a big thing. German nationalism was a big movement, the 1848 revolution that created Germany, and there was a whole tradition of German nationalism. And Germans had a big pride in their country, and after World War I, they were being told by the whole world that they had to be ashamed to be German. And the communists, the Social Democrats agreed with that, and the communists, they wouldn't really oppose it. They opposed the Versailles Treaty, and they opposed forcing average working class people to pay reparations, but they wouldn't say to Germans, you come from a country that has done amazing things, and because of that made it so all nationalism, all pride in Germany's history was in the hands of the far right, and that I think was a strategic blunder. And we should avoid making that mistake here in America, right? We shouldn't hand the entire history of the country over to far right-wingers. Far right-wingers wave the American flag. Trump says, make America great again. And we should be able to say, you don't own all of American history. We should be able to say, no, that John Brown is part of American history, Dr. Martin Luther King is part of American history, Gus Hall, Eugene Debs, William Z. Foster, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn are part of American history. No, 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 no. That Americans can love their country and be proud of who they are and be socialists. And when we burn the American flag, and when we say things like America was never great, we play into handing all of Americans' identity over to the right wing. And that's a problem. I think that America is a country with a lot of evil in its history, but that many Americans, all Americans, most Americans for the most part, are good. Deep down they're good. They want to do good. And they've been duped. And they've been told that their entire identity as Americans is tied in with the free market, is tied in with settler colonialism, is tied in with all of this. And that basically if you want to be progressive, you have to be a flag burner, and that you have to hate your country, and that's all you can do. And our job as socialists is to say, no, that's wrong. That there is a good side to American history, and that side of American history can take power. And that's what the German communists should have done. They should have said to the Germans, yes, the Kaiser was evil. Yes, World War I was evil. But Marx wasn't evil. Mozart wasn't evil. Bach wasn't evil. They should have said that, but they didn't say that. They didn't say that. They were dumb. They didn't say there's a good side to the German nation. They made the mistake of being ultra-left in that way. And because of that, they handed Germany's history and Germany's national identity over to the Nazis. And that was a mistake. And you'll notice, what did the communists do after Hitler came to power? The communists realized they made this mistake, and they launched the Popular Front, the People's Front, the Popular Front. And in the Popular Front, they started, in every country where the communists were existing, they started being ultra-patriotic because they realized, oops, we made a mistake. Oops, by being anti-patriotic in Germany, by saying that no one can be proud to be a German, we really fucked up. We really screwed up. We handed nationalism in Germany over to the Nazis. We handed patriotism in Germany over to the Nazis. And by doing that, we allowed the Nazis and the far right to have a monopoly on the German national identity. And that was a big mistake, right? And that the KPD, they wouldn't play up the idea of a socialist German patriotism, right? And they made a big mistake by doing that. And that's why after the 7th World Congress of the Communist International, thank you, Herb Bryant, for the super chat, deeply appreciated. After the 7th World Congress, the Comintern flipped, and it did the opposite. And Georgy Dimitrov, the leader of the Communist International, says, we must find the progressive figures in the history of France. We must find the progressive figures in the history of Britain. We must find the progressive figures in the history of America. Read the speeches of Georgy Dimitrov to the Communist International. He's saying, we fucked up in Germany, and we have to show that to really love your country means that you reject chauvinism, and national chauvinism, and imperialism means you reject capitalism. You know? Read what the Communist International said. They realized they made a mistake. They made a mistake. That Germans, but the left, message of the left being to Germans that they should be ashamed to be German, that there is no German nation, that message was a mistake. And you'll notice they corrected it. And you'll notice East Germany, the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, you'll notice that they played up the idea of German patriotism and German nationalism. Right? Not German nationalism. Nationalism is chauvinism, is saying your country's better, but a German national identity. Listen to the Thälmann-Lied, the song for Ernst Thälmann that they did. Listen to what the Thälmann pioneers, the young pioneers of East Germany did, right? They didn't say that Germans are evil. They didn't say that there's nothing to be proud of in German's history. They certainly opposed the Nazis. They certainly opposed fascism. They certainly opposed colonialism. But they said that there is a progressive side to the German nationality. And that's how they built socialism in East Germany. So, you cannot build socialism on the basis of hating the country that you're in. Socialists in Brazil don't say fuck Brazil. Socialists in Zimbabwe don't say fuck Zimbabwe. Socialists in Chile don't say fuck Chile, right? Oppose national chauvinism, right? Oppose supremacism, oppose bigotry, oppose imperialism, oppose settler colonialism, but point to the good side of the history of the country you're in and make communists the inheritor of the progressive tradition of the country that you're in. Disagree with me all you want. That's fine. All right, I was asked about Milosevic. Well, Milosevic was the leader of Serbia. As Yugoslavia was breaking apart, Serbia, under the leadership of Milosevic, maintained a socialist economy. So the United States funded this organization called the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA. It was funded by Saudi Arabia and funded by the U.S. imperialists. And it was Albanians who had gone to Kosovo to work, and they became jihadists and fanatics, and they started a separatist movement in Kosovo, and there was a civil war. And it was kind of Syria. Before Syria, you had Serbia, right? And that a fanatical Muslim movement was supported by the imperialists against a socialist government. It was part of the breakup of Yugoslavia. Fanatical Muslim movement created by the imperialists to destabilize and overthrow a socialist government. And it worked, right? Eventually they set up Otpor. Otpor was kind of the model for late color revolutions. Otpor was this group that means like struggle or something. They looked like, they called themselves anarchists. Their symbol was a fist. They looked like leftists, but they were a CIA-funded group that eventually overthrew Milosevic. And we know now, the UN has confirmed there was no genocide in Yugoslavia, right, or in Serbia. There were crimes. There were crimes that were committed. There were atrocities that were committed, absolutely. But the UN and all the international bodies have said the claim that there was mass genocide going on that was not the reality. And you should look into it now. Years later, we've discovered that that a lot of the allegations made, to justify the NATO bombing campaign against Serbia. A lot of the claims that were made to justify destabilizing and overthrowing the government of Serbia were false. That's not to say that people weren't mistreated, right? I'm sure that people were mistreated and such, but the CIA and the Saudis funded this Islamic extremist movement. They fomented a civil war in Kosovo, and the result was destabilizing and overthrowing, and overthrowing a socialist country, and it was not good. All right, someone asked me to slowly explain the falling rate of profits. Okay. I will slowly explain the falling rate of profits. You all are, I'm having a great time. My voice might give out here, but I'm gonna drink another. Okay. How does the capitalist make profits? Right? Let's say that you're in a factory making this pen. Let's say that the materials to make the pen, they cost $1. So we have one. That's the materials for the pen. And the workers who assemble it, the pen, they cost another $1. So 1 plus 1, right? So the total cost of the pen when you buy it is 2, right? Those are the costs of the pen's materials, cost of the labor of the pen, right? Well, how does the capitalist make a profit, right? Well, the profit of the capitalist, he can't change how much the pen costs. You can't change the cost of the materials to make the pen. So the profit that the capitalist makes comes from the worker, right? The profits of the capitalist come by cutting in to what the worker produces, right? The value that the worker creates in making the pen, the worker cannot be paid the full value of his labor. Because if that was the case, the capitalist would never make a profit. The surplus value, what the capitalist gets is called surplus value. Let me do it again because it doesn't work with one. All right. The cost of the pen is 2. Right? It costs $2 for the materials to make the pen. The labor, is $2. Right? The price of the pen is 4. How does the capitalist make a profit? Well, by paying the worker 1 and keeping 1 for himself. That's where the capitalist profit comes from. The capitalist profit is surplus value. Right? He's cutting into the value the worker creates in order to get his profit. That's called surplus value. So what's the falling rate of profit? Well, the falling rate of profit is, right? The capitalist is always trying to eliminate workers from production. He wants to hire as few workers as he possibly can. So as the amount of workers decreases, right? So now let's say the pen instead you have a bunch of machines making pens. So the assembly of the pen, the materials, the machines, and all that is 3, and the labor cost is almost only 1. Right? The cost of the pen is still 4. If that becomes the equation, the capitalist now has to cut out of 1 because only workers can produce surplus value. You don't get surplus value from the machine, right? You can only create surplus value from the worker. And that is the falling rate of profit. As the capitalist advances technology, he has a falling rate of profit because he can't get surplus value from a machine. He can only get surplus value by cutting into the value created from the worker. That is the falling rate of profit. And as workers are eliminated from the assembly line, the rate of profit of the capitalist decreases. The amount of profit he can make off of a product goes down. The falling rate of profit. Sorry. It's not a simple concept. It's important. Not a simple one. All right. Okay. Now, this was a question I got. Counter-revolution from religious groups in a socialist United States. The question I got was, how do we prevent a counter-revolution led by religious groups in a future socialist USA? Okay, well, first of all, folks, let's remember that we're not on the brink of socialists coming to power in the United States right now. I kind of try to avoid questions like this. I remember in high school, I used to always have conversations. People would say to me, would we be allowed to have amusement parks in socialism? Yes, socialist countries have amusement parks. There's a Seinfeld episode where Seinfeld, it's Kramer, I believe. The Kramer character, he's becoming a Santa Claus. And he and this other guy, they're like, there are Santa Clauses at Macy's. And the other guy, he's becoming a communist. Kramer's becoming a communist. He says, will we be able to have delis under communism? He says, well, sure, you can have delis under communism. You just can't have separate classes for the meat. And this is just kind of silly. It's like, this is a utopian understanding of socialism. Socialism is my dream blueprint world. And so you're going to play 20 questions with me about what my dream blueprint world looks like. And that's pretty silly. Socialism doesn't come into being because somebody sits there and draws up the ideal blueprint and then takes power and implements it. Socialism comes into being as a result of really existing, contradictions in society that give rise to it. That's why socialism comes into existence. So back up, right? Socialism in the United States would come into existence because real contradictions would emerge, because there'd be class struggle that would enable a mass movement to come into existence, and the people to come together and reorganize the economy and take control of the means of production. So in that situation, I can imagine that there would be millions of evangelical people who would support it. In Venezuela today, many evangelical Christians are big supporters of Maduro, right? I bet you didn't know that. Maduro is Roman Catholic, but there are many, I met them when I was in Venezuela, there are many evangelical Christians that are big supporters of Maduro. And I can imagine that for socialism to come to power in the United States, there would have to be a lot of religious socialists. There's going to be a lot of atheist socialists as well. There's a lot of atheism in this country. Atheism is rising, but a very big percentage of the U.S. public considers itself to be religious. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of religious socialists who take power. And for socialism to really come to power in the United States, a lot of religious people would have to support it. Now, would there be groups of religious people that would oppose it? Sure. Right? Sure. And just like any other state, if people are engaging in terrorism and violence and trying to overthrow it, a socialist state would stop them from doing that. So the question, I think, is predicated on a very strange premise. I think the person is assuming, first of all, that no religious person would ever support socialism. And I'm telling you that no socialist government in the United States would ever be able to come to power without a lot of religious people supporting it, number one. And number two, I think the person is assuming then that this would mean some kind of mass crackdown on all religious believers. Well, the person's just wrong. The entire premise of the question is just wrong. The only way socialism would come to power in the United States would be if there was a lot of religious people supporting it, and I would believe that socialism in the United States would respect religious freedom overwhelmingly. But would there be religious and non-religious people that maybe tried to engage in terrorism and violently overthrow it? Perhaps, and they would be dealt with the same way any government would deal with terrorism and violent extremists that want to overthrow it. So I think the question was a strange one. I think they were hoping that I would say, yes, then we set up death camp for all true believers. Anyone who believes in Bible get shot. Yeah. Evil communism will take power. Do you believe in God? You get death penalty. Well, I'm sorry if I didn't give you the answer you were looking for. I have said many, many, many times that socialism could only come to the United States, if it was an American form of socialism, a socialism rooted in American culture and America's traditions. In the Middle East, Marxist-Leninist socialism was very weak. In Yemen, it came to power briefly, but for the most part, it didn't work, right? The atheist socialism didn't catch on. The socialism that arose in the Middle East was Ba'athist Arab socialism that is it's secular. It advocates a secular government, but it's pro-Islam, right? The Ba'athists believe that Islam is a brilliant religion. It's a key part of Arabism. In Iraq, in Syria, in Libya under Gaddafi, socialism was very Islamic because the Arab people believe in Islam. In Iran, they call their system not capitalism, but Islam. And, the state largely plans out the economy, but they are very, very deeply religious, and it's an anti-imperialist government that's deeply religious. And I believe that in the United States, our socialism will have lots of religious aspects. Because we believe in separation of church and state, I don't think it'll be an explicitly religious government. But I think that there will be a lot of pastors and congregations that support it. I think there'll be a lot of religious socialist organizations that will spring up, and I cannot imagine an anti-religious government emerging in the United States. The American people are deeply religious, right? And that's not just white people, people of color. African Americans are deeply religious. The Latino community is deeply religious. There will not be an atheist regime in the United States. That would never happen, and I wouldn't support it. I'm not an atheist, and I would never support a regime that would outlaw Christianity, outlaw Judaism, outlaw Islam, outlaw any religion, right? I believe religion is a matter of personal conscience. I believe that we should not have a religious government. I believe in the separation of church and state, but I also believe in religious freedom. People should be allowed to practice their faith. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Now, Joanne asked about Freemasonry in U.S. history, and she said that she thought the reason that all these cities had Greek and Roman names was because of Freemasonry. Well, Freemasonry, you have to understand, what is Freemasonry, okay? There's a lot of people who sit and it's like the Masons are this evil conspiracy, the Scottish Rite Masons secretly control the world, it's this whole vast conspiracy led by the Illuminati and the thing, high up on the thing, and, okay, what is Freemasonry? Well, Freemasonry, it goes back to the time that capitalism was was overthrowing feudalism, right? Capitalism was becoming the dominant system in the world. And the Protestant Reformation had a lot to do with capitalism becoming the dominant system, right? In France, feudalism was propped up by the Catholic Church. So, and if you disagreed with the Catholic Church, that was called heresy, and you could be burned at the stake. You could be killed, if you contradicted the Catholic Church. So, in order to organize, you had to form secret societies. In Bavaria, it was a Catholic country, a Catholic region. It was not yet part of Germany, but it was a Catholic region, a Catholic country at that point. The people that wanted to overthrow feudalism, they formed the Illuminati, it was called. It was just a secret club that they formed. It was a secret society to overthrow feudalism in Bavaria. It was called the Bavarian Illuminati. in Britain, the people who wanted to overthrow feudalism and the people that were involved in kind of pushing back the influence of the Catholic Church, they were radical Protestants and stuff, they were involved in the Freemasonry. And in France, you had Freemasonry. And that a lot of secret societies were formed by people who wanted to overthrow feudalism. And that was necessary because feudalism was a very totalitarian system. No freedom of religion, no freedom of speech, no freedom of expression. And, people got burned at the stake all the time. Galileo said that the earth was not the center of the universe, and they threatened him on point of torture, and he spent the rest of his life in house arrest. So, it was necessary to form these kind of secret societies to overthrow feudalism and establish capitalism. And we know that especially in Britain, that in Britain, the process of overthrowing feudalism was a very long process, right? You still had feudalism in the Scottish Highlands. You had the English Civil War and the Cavaliers versus the what were they called? The Roundheads. The Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. And, it was a long struggle to eradicate feudalism in Britain. It was not a short thing. The English Civil War and the Jacobite uprisings. And it was this long period of transition, right? The overthrow of feudalism was a long period. There was a lot of fighting on both sides. The monarchy was constantly changing. So, like we know Isaac Newton, for example, was a Freemason, right? He was the father of Newtonian physics, right? He brought physics, and he was a scientist, and he was a Freemason. And that a lot of the people in Britain who were anti-Catholic and anti-feudal were Freemasons because, they had formed this secret society. And that as a result of that, the United States, right, the 13 colonies had been settled by the English. And that a lot of the founders of the United States came out of that tradition of the Enlightenment, of trying to overthrow feudalism, and they were Freemasons also. You have to understand, back then there was no television. Back then there was no internet. People had to entertain themselves. Books were a rare commodity, right? It used to be that bookstores, you had a subscription. And read about this, that bookstores, it used to be, it wasn't like you go into the bookstore and buy whichever book is interesting. People would subscribe to bookstores and get every book they got. And that wasn't many books. They maybe had one new book every month, or maybe one new book every week, right? That a book was like a rare commodity, and everyone read the same books. That's why when Edward Gibbon's Fall of the Roman Empire came out around the time of the American Revolution, all the founding fathers read it because there weren't that many books being published, and they had subscriptions to bookstores, and that book got a copy, and everyone got one because it was the book that was being printed at that time. And so, yes, back at the time that feudalism was being overthrown, a lot of the gentlemen, the wealthy people, the landowners and such, they were in secret societies like Freemasons. Freemasons don't allow Roman Catholics to join because of the right of confession, right? And that Catholics are obligated to confess their sins to their confessor, and Freemasons banned Catholics because you would reveal the secrets of Masonry to confess, and that Freemasonry, the struggle to overthrow capitalism involved, a lot of secret societies, and Freemasonry was part of that. Now, what's interesting is the Freemasons, you'll notice that they use the logo of the Knights Templar in their ceremonies. Do people know about the Knights Templar? Well, that was the Crusades, right? When the Crusades were waged, when the Catholic Church tried to reconquer Jerusalem from the Muslims, they formed a monastic order called the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar, they were warrior monks, basically. They were monks, but they didn't do what monks normally do. They went out and fought Muslims and seized Jerusalem. They were the Knights Templar. Well, the Knights Templar, their role was that they were, it was monks, it was young men from all over Europe were going to Jerusalem to fight against the Muslims, to retake Jerusalem from the Muslims. That was what they did. But when they came back from the Crusades, they brought with them all the science that had been developed in the Middle East. While Europe was in the dark ages of feudalism, in the Middle East, they had made huge breakthroughs in mathematics and in astronomy and all kinds of things. So the Knights Templar, the Crusaders, were going to the Middle East and fighting against the Muslims. And they were going to the Muslim world, and they were learning that Muslims were way more advanced in architecture. They were learning that Muslims were way more advanced in mathematics, way more advanced in astronomy, way more advanced in physics. The Islamic Enlightenment was happening in the Muslim world. So the Crusaders were going there and getting some of that knowledge. And they were bringing it back to Europe. And so they were using that knowledge, and they were kind of quietly teaching it to people in kind of a secret way. So the Catholic Church executed the Knights Templar, and they were all burned at the stake, right? Because the Catholic Church knew that these Knights Templar were spreading science and information that was dangerous to feudalism. The Knights Templar were all burned at the stake. Well, the Freemasons, they view that as a moment in which the Catholic Church revealed itself to be against historical progress, and that's why the Freemasons use the image of the Knights Templar in their ceremonies, because they're honoring the Knights Templar. They view them as people that brought scientific wisdom back to Europe from the Muslim world and were burned at the stake for it. And it's pretty wild. It's a pretty wild story, and there's a lot of crazy conspiracy theories about it. Put the crazy conspiracy theories aside. This is just historical facts that Knights Templar brought some of the science of the Muslim world to Europe, and as a result, they were burned at the stake for that. And so as a result, the Freemasons, the societies that were formed to overthrow feudalism, admired the Knights Templar. And also, that's why Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the founding fathers of the United States owned the Quran. Why? Because as Freemasons, they studied Islam. Because it was this whole understanding that there was all this knowledge from the Middle East that had been corrupted and been suppressed, and part of the Freemasons was believing that information was allowed. And so, yes, and Thomas Jefferson, he had a Quran, and he studied the Bible, and he studied the Quran. And that there is a lot of Islamic symbolism, right? There's on the fez, you'll see a lot of a lot of Freemason symbols have the crescent and the star, the symbol of Islam. And that's because of the fact that that it's all because of this. So, Freemasonry, it's important. There's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet. I know some people were claiming that 9/11 was done by the Freemasons so that they could retake Jerusalem. No. There's a lot of crazy stuff. Whenever you say Freemasonry, people go crazy and they come up with all this crazy stuff. The reality is, the Freemasons were like a club, a secret order that was formed to overthrow feudalism. They were key in the French Revolution, the French wing of it, which is not connected to the British wing of it. There's Scottish Rite Masonry, English Rite Masonry, and that Freemasonry is just, it was a secret society the capitalists formed to overthrow feudalism, and it played a big role in the founding of the United States and in the founding of many modern countries in the overthrow of feudalism. And they were deeply influenced by Islam because they viewed the Knights Templar as being victims of the Catholic order. They believed in science. They believed in historical progress and science, and they viewed feudalism and the Catholic Church as being against historical progress, right? They were capitalist revolutionaries overthrowing feudalism. I hope that answers your question, and I hope no one thinks I'm promoting the crazy conspiracy theories about the Freemasons and the Illuminati. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just telling you about the historical facts. We have officially run out of unnamed diet beverage. Okay, so the last 3 Super Chat questions. I'm going to nail these out. I'm going to read you the thing about the fall of Rome, and then we're done, because I've been going quite a long time here. I'm having a good time, but my voice ain't going to last forever. So, keep up your important work, Caleb. Thank you. I like the work that I do, and I'm talking about all the stuff I care about, but I'm sorry if I sound a little grumpy, but it's it's a long day. I've been on here for a while. We're going to keep going until we're done. Okay, last 3 questions. Russian Constitution. Big pet peeve of mine. Every time a country that's anti-imperialist wants to lift term limits, the U.S. media always distorts it and says, oh, he wants to be president for life. In Venezuela, they had a vote, a referendum, and it would lift term limits. Oh, they're taking a vote on whether Hugo Chavez is president for life. No. Japan doesn't have term limits. Britain doesn't have term limits. All kinds of countries don't have term limits, okay? We didn't have term limits in this country until the death of Roosevelt. So, if Russia is going to lift term limits and allow Putin to keep running for president, they have the right to do that. It's not Putin being president for life. It's lifting term limits, okay? And I'm so annoyed with this. People believe this, right? They believe it. Oh, they're voting on whether or not he can be president for life. No, they're voting on whether or not the country has term limits. The leader has to keep getting reelected, folks, and that's a pet peeve of mine. It's it's a distortion of facts, And whenever they have a referendum in Venezuela or Bolivia or any socialist, they're voting on whether he can be president for life. No, 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 no. And that shows how vile and lying Western media is. I mean, it made me mad. In Venezuela, right? They took, and it failed. It didn't pass. There was a referendum on whether they would lift term limits, and it didn't pass. But three of my college professors said, they're taking a vote today in Venezuela on whether Hugo Chavez can be president for life. No, they're not. They're taking a vote on whether or not there's term limits, whether he can keep running or not. Come on, people. I mean, people are so easily led by this imperialist propaganda. So annoying, right? And you know what? I want to say, as much as I'm annoyed by it, I appreciate it. I appreciate it in a way, right? Vosh should say that on his next live stream. He should say, in 2015, in Russia, they're taking a vote on whether Putin can be president for life. And, sure, people that just are sheep and want to believe it are going to look at it, but there's going to be a lot of people that are a little bit smarter than that. And they're going to look at what they're actually voting on, and they're going to go, wow, Vosh lied to me. Wow, CNN lied to me. So keep lying that obviously. Keep lying that obviously. You're doing all of us a favor. Right? It's so annoying, right? These people that just want to believe whatever mainstream media says, and they lie so obviously they lie. Russia's not voting on whether Putin can be president for life. They're voting on whether or not term limits are included. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's a complicated situation. It's not just that issue. But if Russia wants to lift term limits and not have term limits, like Japan, like Britain, they have the right to do that. We didn't have term limits in this country until the death of Roosevelt. So there you go. Okay, China, Myanmar, Rohingya. I don't know enough about that issue, honestly. I really don't. I know that Myanmar is aligned with China, and that China and the Myanmar government are very close. But I don't know the details about Rohingya and the role that China is playing and all of that. I don't know. I just can't give you an answer there. I wish I had more of an answer for you. Don't have an answer. This may come as a surprise to some of you, but I do not know everything. There are some things I do not know, and I'm honest about that. There are some people on YouTube who might pretend that that's not the case. A friend asks, why do you think libertarians tend to be insecure man-children when their ideology gets debunked? Writing it down. Oh, boy. Okay. How will a U.S. collapse affect world politics? We don't want a U.S. collapse, right? We don't want a U.S. collapse, right? We want the USA to be reborn with socialism. We don't want a U.S. collapse. Collapses are bad. That would mean that all of the businesses around the world tied to the USA go out of business, and all the people tied to those things lose their jobs. That would mean you don't want a collapse, okay? A collapse is not good. You want an end to U.S. imperialism. You want an end to imperialism. You want an end to colonialism. You want an end to racism. You don't want a U.S. collapse. The collapse of a society, the collapse of a civilization is not something you want. It would probably result in Russia and China stepping up to the plate, right? And they would step up to the plate. That might be good for them in the short term, but the collapse of any society is not good. I'd like to see the U.S. economy stop functioning in an imperialist manner, start being more tied in with One Belt, One Road initiative, tied in with the Eurasian Economic Union. I would like to see a U.S. economy restructured to not be an imperialist economy. Right? I don't want to see a collapse. You think things are bad in the USA because of the pandemic. Imagine a collapse. Imagine the food system breaking down. Imagine gasoline not being available and people not being able to drive. Collapses are hell. You don't want to live through a collapse, right? People who lived through the fall of the Soviet Union will tell you how bad it was. The fall of Rome was a disaster, and I'm about to read to you about it, right? Civilizational collapses are bad things. They lead to mass death. They lead to chaos. They lead to organized crime. They lead to terrorism. You don't want to live through a collapse. You don't want to live through a collapse, okay? And it might sound woke. You might feel like, yeah, I wanted the whole mother to collapse. Woo! Well, grow up. You don't want to live through a collapse. You do not want to live through a collapse. Okay. Last super chat question, unless somebody does another one, but I'm not going to go too much longer. Why are libertarians insecure man-children when their ideology is debunked? Well, a lot of people are. Okay, I'll be real. Nobody likes to be told that their most sacred beliefs are wrong. Okay, so you got to cut them some slack, right? I'll never forget the story. I've probably told you all this, but when I was in the Back when I was your age, young man. I'm only 32. Can I talk that way? But no, when I was in ninth grade, I sat next to a young woman who was a fundamental Baptist. She was a Baptist. She wore dresses to school every day. She wasn't allowed to wear pants. Very very religious girl. And we were sitting there before math class. Teacher was late. And we were just chatting. And I said to her that I intended, I said, when I'm 21 years old, I told this girl, I said to her that, I think I will drink responsibly. I will drink alcohol when I'm 21 years old. She said, you can't do that. You can't drink alcohol. And I said, why not? I said, I'll be 21 years old. I won't drink and drive, and I won't get drunk. But, I feel like when one is 21 years old and of legal age, one can drink responsibly. This girl said, you can't do that. It's against, it's wrong. The Bible and God says you can't drink alcohol. You can't do that. And I said, why did Jesus, for his first miracle, turn water into wine? And she said, oh, my pastor explained that. It was grape juice. They thought it was wine. I said, really? And she said, yeah, they thought it was wine because it was grape. It was made from grapes, but Jesus would never supply people with wine because alcohol is evil and goes against God and everything he stands for. And I said to her, you do realize that pasteurization had not been invented yet. So that wine, even if it was grape juice, would have turned into wine pretty quickly. I said, there were no refrigerators back then. There was no pasteurization. There was no way to have grape juice back then. So I said this, and she burst into tears. She just started crying, sobbing. And I was like, oh shit, she's crying. You never want to make a woman cry. Not a good look for a man. But when I said, that wine that Jesus must have created with his miracle must not have been grape juice, she started crying. So then the next day, the math teacher came in. We had math class. I assume she stopped crying or whatever. So the next day, the math teacher came in before he started class. And he said, Mr. Maupin, I want to see you out in the hallway. I walked into the hallway. I'm like, what's going on here? Math teacher said to me, he said, you must not make fun of other people's religion. And then he moved me to the other side of the room. I was not allowed to sit next to that girl anymore because I had made fun of her religion. Well, there you go, folks. That's people don't like to see their beliefs dissected. But yeah, so I learned that, I guess, in ninth grade. I feel sorry for her that her beliefs were so shallow that she would burst into tears when I would point out that her beliefs were wrong. People take it personally. People don't like to have their beliefs dissected. Now, libertarianism is an interesting thing because the problem with libertarians is this. Libertarianism is a unique case. Because the thing is, a lot of Americans, they don't want to adopt a new ideology. And a lot of Americans are raised to believe that anything that is left-wing is evil. That's really common. Everything bad is socialist. Everything bad is communist. Everything left-wing is evil. Capitalism is good. American conservatism has just degenerated to this point into just blind belief in capitalism. The Trump supporters at this point, like I said, Trump's not a fascist. If he was a fascist, he'd be doing fascism. He's just doing capitalism. A lot of people grow up in households with kind of an authoritarian father figure who listens to Rush Limbaugh and he's the go-to man about politics. When I was growing up in my little town, people would say, talking about politics, they'd say, I have to ask my dad what we think about that in our house. That was common, right? I would know people at my school. Let me ask my dad what our opinion is, right? It's kind of like the family is almost like a little mini totalitarian state where the father decides what the party line is, right? That's kind of how some of these households are. Somebody realizes that, there's a problem in the United States of America, that America isn't the greatest country in the world, that there is actually poverty and unemployment and all of that. And they get scared. They get very, very afraid because they're not allowed, right? They've grown up thinking that everything evil is left, everything evil is socialist, socialism and communism are evil. So How can they reconcile this? The U.S. is waging wars that are unjust. The U.S. government is violating people's rights. There's police brutality. There's poverty. America isn't paradise. It's not the shining city on the hill. It's not perfect. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Well, what do you do? Right? What do you do? Well, you become a libertarian. The USA is communist. Duh. Oh, the USA is communist, right? We don't have real capitalism. See, you can still believe that all socialism is evil. You can still believe that all things that are left-wing are evil. And the USA just doesn't have real capitalism. Duh. Why didn't I think of that before? Barack Obama is a communist. George W. Bush is a neocon Trotskyite trying to spread global Marxist revolution. Duh. Duh. The Federal Reserve is in the Communist Manifesto. It's the fifth plank, a central bank. Oh, duh. The USA is communist. Oh, phew. For a minute, I was worried I might have to actually question the ideology I'd grown up with. Phew. It was so scary there for a minute. I might have to actually question whether or not greed is good. I might have to question all the bullshit I've been spoon-fed my whole life. Phew, I can be a libertarian. So easy. So easy. That's why most people, that's libertarians in a nutshell. That's most libertarians. It's a way to believe the right-wing ideology, believe the free market propaganda they've heard all their life, and recognize there are problems in the United States. And I warned people around 2006, 2007, I warned people about this. Because I was in a leftist group that was, at that point, they were saying, we all have to protest against the Iraq War. That's what we got to do. We got to protest the Iraq War. Build protests, build the movement. And I was saying to them, there's a problem. There's people that are turning against these wars and saying we need real capitalism. There's people that are turning against these wars and saying that Bush is a secret communist Trotskyist. And the group I was with said, oh, don't worry about that. I said, this is a problem. There's people that are waking up and realizing the country is corrupt, but they're waking up wrong. I said, Ron Paul is really dangerous. When Ron Paul, the rise of Ron Paul, 2008, Ron Paul was everybody. I said, Ron Paul is really dangerous. And these boomer leftists just said, oh, just build the movement. Just build the movement, man. Once they join the movement, they'll realize that capitalism's the problem. Just build the movement. I was like, no, there's people waking up wrong. The movement isn't going to have the answer. There's an ideological problem, folks. They're just like, oh, no, build the movement, man. Play the drums. Build the protest cage. And I'm like, no, there's an ideological problem here. They didn't listen to me. And I said, there's fascism. I was wrong. Whatever. I was saying this is like fascist stuff, right-wing anti-capitalism. Right-wing, people who say we need to restore the libertarian past, kill the there's this problem with like anti-establishment right-wingism. And some of the best people that I actually learned a lot about other things, just blew me off. They didn't know anybody. And I was on my campus in Ohio. I was handing out leaflets on the street. I was encountering libertarians everywhere. And I was saying there's this ideological problem called libertarianism. There's an anti-establishment right. There's the Ron Paul movement. This is a problem. And they blew me off. They blew me off. They didn't listen to me because they knew better. They knew better. Oh, no. I've been doing this 60 years. I've been an activist for 60 years. I marched on the Pentagon with Abby Hoffman. I know it all. I know it all. They knew it all. Oh, it's not a problem, Caleb. No. This Ron Paul stuff, that's not a big deal. It's not a problem. Oh, we know it all. We know it all. Just build the movement. Just build the movement. They blew me off. They were completely out of touch. I told them that people on my college campus who should be waking up and becoming socialists are becoming Ron Paul supporters. And they said to me, oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, no, it's not. They didn't listen to me. They knew better, right? They'd been building these communist groups that had been getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. They knew better, right? They knew it all. Build the movement, man. Peace activism. I was telling them there's an ideological problem in America. The problem is not a lack of a movement. There is an ideological problem in America. And what did they say to me? They said, oh, just build the movement, man. Just build the movement. Not a big deal. Build the movement, man. Yeah. Libertarianism is dangerous. I think now it's been weakened. As I said in my debate with big libertarian Adam Kokesh, at this point, I don't think libertarianism is dangerous anymore. It was dangerous back then. It should have been ideologically defeated back then, but instead the leftists were too busy focused on building the movement and sucking up to Obama, right? Sucking up to Obama. A lot of that went on. It was pathetic. pathetic sucking up to Obama. And because of that, libertarianism flourished, and Trumpism is like libertarianism part two, right? It's not exactly libertarianism. It's economic nationalism. It's the Ron Paul. In order to have Trump, you had to have Ron Paul first. And the left refused to combat it, and now we have a problem. Nobody listens to me. Well, a lot of you listen to me, thank goodness, but no one was listening to me. As a Marxist, let me, before I do the reading, I'll just end this way. I'll end this. I'll say this. This will be my last point on the libertarian thing. As a Marxist, you should not be out of touch with the world. You need to know what average people are thinking about politics. You need to know what other people are thinking. If you're on your Facebook, on your Twitter, talking to other Marxists, you don't know what average people think. And you need to be in touch with wider trends in the society. You need to go to movies that are not leftist and socialist movies. You need to know about the popular music that people are listening to. It's not communist music, not socialist music, but the music that's mainstream music. You need to be in touch with the broad masses of people and understand what's going on in the wider society. And a lot of Marxists have failed to do that. Movementism is very much a failure. I'm not saying you should embrace it, but you need to know what's out there and be able to engage with it. Right? You need to be able to engage with it. You need to be able to engage with it. A libertarian talking point. It's actually a Nazi talking point that libertarians adopted, was that the Bolshevik Revolution was a Wall Street conspiracy theory. Very popular libertarian talking point, lifted from the Nazis. The Nazis came up with this. They came up with this idea that the Bolshevik Revolution was a conspiracy by a Wall Street banker named Jacob Schiff. Well, if you look into the facts, Jacob Schiff was not a supporter of the Bolsheviks. He was very anti-Bolshevik. He was a supporter of the World Zionist Organization. He didn't like the Tsar, but he hated the Bolsheviks, and he actually worked very hard. He funded the World Zionist Organization that said Marxism was its main enemy, so it's a lie, right? But this is very widespread. I've heard this many times. And when I would go out and sell newspapers, when I would hand out leaflets, people would say to me, well, actually, I heard that the communism is a Wall Street conspiracy theory. And I said to the Marxists, we need to come up with literature to refute that. And they said, nobody believes that. No one really believes that. No, it's very widespread. I did the research. I wrote the articles. Someone said QAnon is the new problem. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of the problem. I did the research and dug into who Jacob Schiff was and what his politics were really about and refuted this. But these Marxists lived in this little bubble, this movement bubble. Hey, no one at my rally said that. I had a rally last week of 30 people marching against the war, and we stood around with picket signs. Not a single person there believed that, so I've never heard it. Well, it's widespread in the society. Look, I saw Trump coming a mile away. That there would be an anti-establishment right in the United States. I called it 10 years ahead of time, that the anti-establishment movement that would arise in the aftermath of the financial crisis would come from the right, that there would be the rise of an anti-establishment right wing in the United States. I called it. I was raising the alarm about it. 10 years ahead of Trump, I said it. 10 years before Trump got elected, I said it. And these dumb leftists, these movementarian losers, hippies, didn't listen to me. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. And if you're a Marxist, you can't live in a bubble. Out of the movement and to the masses. Get out of the movement and get to the masses. There's an ideological problem in America. The problem is not a lack of protests. The problem is not a lack of people doing whatever liberals are doing and protesting around the latest trendy liberal cause. That's not the problem in America. The problem is ideological. The problem is, first of all, the wider society has no understanding of what Marxists and socialists believe. The second problem is that the Marxist movement is lost and confused in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union and all of that. The Marxist movement is very, very confused and doesn't know what it believes. There's a twofold ideological problem. And before we set up political infrastructure, before we can have unemployment councils, before we can start feeding people and doing things like the Panthers did and the unemployment councils, we have to address this ideological problem. Number one, the broad masses of people need to understand class struggle, socialist politics. Number two, the Marxist movement has got to get itself understanding what's going on in the world. It needs an understanding of what's happening in the world, and it needs an understanding of it. And this book which I'm about to read to you from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, is my attempt to address those two issues. Average Americans need to understand that we need a government of action to fight for working families, and Marxists need to understand what the hell happened in the 20th century. So, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age is my very long book attempting to answer that question. And, as I promised, before I go, I will read you the section about the fall of Rome. And then I'm out of here before my voice gives out. Alrighty. Reactionary thought and vandal mindsets certainly manifested themselves as humanity marched onward in spite of them. The Roman Empire was a great manifestation of barbarism and savagery. Rome was a military society founded on holding back history and plundering other peoples, living off tribute and slaves extracted at the point of a spear. The founding myth of Rome presents a message that seems to be completely opposed to the founding myths of Mesopotamia and illustrates the difference between the two civilizations. The legend of Rome's founding told of two twin brothers abandoned by their father and left to die by the river as infants. Romulus and Remus, according to the legend, were never loved and cared for by humans, but rather were nursed and raised by a she-wolf. The Romans believed that the strength which had enabled the two co-founders to establish a mighty empire flowed from their lack of human empathy. The lack of human affection and exposure to the wild predator mentality was believed to have enabled Romulus and Remus to grow into effective conquerors who could establish a slave society. In the Roman Empire, cruelty, sadism, and indifference toward the suffering of others were celebrated traits actively cultivated by the rulers. As Rome's agricultural and industrial output gradually decreased, with a highly inefficient slave system of production in its plantations and mines, Rome continued to make up the difference by conquering other peoples. The German scholar Karl Kautsky reflected on Rome's reactionary nature, writing, quote, "The slave economy did not denote a technical advance, but a step backward. Not only did it make the masters impotent and incapable of working, and increase the number of unproductive workers in society, but it also cut down the productivity of productive workers and checked the progress of technology, with the possible exception of some luxury trades. Like every mode of production that is founded on contradictions, the ancient slave economy dug its own grave. In the form it finally took in the Roman world empire, it was based on war. It was only the continual victorious wars and continual subjugation of new nations, continual extension of territory of the empire that could supply the masses of cheap slave material that it required. The Roman Republic had a hereditary Senate, elected representatives, and elements of democracy for the simple reason that this was a better way of motivating its citizenry to plunder. A population that feels somehow involved in the business of governing and the distribution of loot is far more motivated to join wars of conquest than those who simply exist as the subjects of an autocrat. However, the limited democratic procedures within the city-state empire proved to be too dangerous to the small elite families who held actual power. The typical Roman was a hedonist who bet money on Colosseum fights and chariot races, while seeking pleasure from orgies, drunkenness, and overeating, often to the point of induced vomit. The archetype of a shallow, pleasure-hungry sadist who was actively cultivated by the empire with gladiatorial shows, infanticide, and other barbaric practices designed to stimulate the primitive side of the human mind. For the minority of Romans whose intellect would not allow them to be satisfied by hedonism. The Stoic cults emerged to satisfy their need to find deeper meaning in life. For Stoics, the sadism of Roman life was replaced by a glorified masochism, dressed up in spiritual and philosophical pretensions. Romans who wanted more meaning in their lives than physical pleasure and cruelty would induce states of supposed mysticism with ritualized self-mutilation, flagellation, and even starvation. The Stoics would drug themselves in order to have hallucinations, believing this was a way to connect with divinity. The Stoic Romans would worship some new god imported from part of the empire and form little cults in the hope of finding truths concealed by the official imperial gods. The Stoic Romans, who longed for something more out of life, would often be preyed upon by philosophical con men, like Seneca. The charlatans preached on the supposed ethical merits of poverty while demanding huge sums in tribute from their flocks. The apparent hypocrisy of various Stoic gurus and preachers became the subject of many Roman comedies. While the Romans who rejected hedonism and the cruelty of the empire were more intelligent and had more potential to create real change, their ability to break with societal norms was simply channeled into another venue of self-destruction. Yet, even within this nightmare of historical reaction called the Roman Empire, the city-building tendency within humanity asserted itself. Gaius Julius Caesar, a military man born from among the aristocracy, emerged in the late Roman Republic to present a progressive vision. Michael Parenti's award-winning work of political science and historiography, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome, tells of a maligned populist reformer who championed everyday Romans against the wealthy landowners. Parenti writes, quote, "He used state power to effect some limited benefits to the small farmers, the debtors, and the urban proletariat at the expense of the wealthy few. No matter how limited these reforms proved to be, the oligarchs never forgave him, and so Caesar met the same fate as many Roman reformers before him." Parenti's book recounting the life and death of Julius Caesar was the 2004 online review of books nonfiction book of the year, the same year that Parenti published his widely praised text. The Caucus for New Political Science gave him a Career Achievement Award. Parenti's scholarship was groundbreaking because it showed Julius Caesar in a completely different light, challenging the narrative put forward by William Shakespeare and the Roman historians who favored a perspective of the wealthy elite. Parenti draws from the words of those who demonized Caesar to show that their contempt was rooted in their own class interests. Parenti quotes sources such as the Greek biographer and essayist Plutarch, who accused Caesar of stirring up and attaching himself to numerous diseased and corrupted elements in the polity. Parenti also quotes Appian, another Roman historian, who described Caesar as having induced laws for the betterment of the poor. The specifics of Caesar's reforms shows him as a thoroughly progressive-minded leader. Caesar sent the unemployed proletarians of Rome to rebuild city-states throughout the empire in the hopes of making them thriving centers of trade. Caesar constructed public libraries, giving the citizenry access to written records and information. Caesar cracked down on moneylenders and lifted the restrictions and penalties on debtors. He imposed luxury taxes on the decadent rich. Caesar granted Roman citizenship to all doctors and teachers, hoping to reward and cultivate the kind of people who make Rome a center of science, civilization, and culture. Caesar was appointed by the Senate for a 10-year term as the imperator, or Roman head of state. On 3 different occasions, Caesar was offered a crown, but each time he declined to become a monarch. Despite being a strong man, Caesar remained an advocate of democracy, and he was loved by the people. His power came from thousands of Roman proletarians, free citizens with no property, who saw him as their champion against the wealthy landowners and senators. This mobilization of the people as a populare or a populist made Caesar far more powerful than any emperor or king could be. Caesar's vision of reconstructing Roman society involved mobilizing millions of people not as plundering raiders extracting tribute, but as city builders, continuing the great project of making music for which Socrates had been executed by a similar short-sighted elite in Greece and Athens. Parenti explains, quote, "The Senate aristocrats killed Caesar because they perceived him to be a popular leader who threatened their privileged interests. The greatest sin of Julius Caesar in the eyes of the Roman elite was talk of land redistribution, ensuring that a tiny oligarchy would not maintain a monopoly over the main source of wealth for Roman society, the mines and the plantations." Parenti quotes Plutarch in describing how Caesar's land reform provided that almost the whole of Campania be divided among the poor and needy. Caesar also talked of granting citizenship to people throughout the rest of the empire. Parenti quotes Roman historian Cicero, who bemoaned that Caesar planned to confer citizenship not merely onto individuals, but onto entire nations and peoples and provinces. If people in Central Europe, Persia, North Africa, and other conquered lands could join the Roman people in setting policies and enjoying the fruits of empire, the civilization might be more sustainable. Having championed the common people, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death in the Roman Senate. Parenti explains the assassination. Caesar was branded a traitor by members of that class. He committed the unforgivable sin of trying to redistribute, albeit in modest portions, some of the wealth that the very rich tirelessly siphon from the state coffers and from the labor of the many. It was unforgivable that he should tamper with the system of upward expropriation that they embraced as their birthright. Caesar seems to have not comprehended that in the conflict between the haves and the have-nots, the haves are really the have-it-alls. The Roman aristocrats lambasted the palest reforms as the worst kind of thievery. Love your work. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you love my work. I'm going to keep reading. The beginning of a calamitous revolution, leveling and necessitating extreme countermeasures. And they presented their violent retaliation not as an ugly class expediency, but as an honorable act on behalf of Roman liberty. The assassination of Julius Caesar, though it was met with riots and rebellions among the people, ultimately doomed Roman civilization. Some of the very senators who had stabbed Caesar wept by his funeral pyre because they realized that their empire needed a progressive thinker, a strong leader, an advocate of kindness and compassion and solidarity to lead it towards something better. But yet, in love with their own profits, the greedy and rich had stabbed to death the very person who could have saved their empire from its own self-destructiveness and vandal tendencies. The demise of the Roman Republic, marked by the stabbing of its greatest advocate and creation, was a historical turning point that paved the way for the empire's eventual decline and fall. With any notion of democracy being too dangerous to the rich and powerful, Rome descended into naked autocracy, with a string of emperors who claimed to be gods, leading it further and further down the road to decay. After the fall of Rome came the Dark Ages, and huge setbacks for civilization in Europe. As Rome declined, the weary and demoralized public began to give the Stoics the upper hand. In the final years, Romans began trading in Bacchus, the god of pleasure and orgies, for a sanitized and redacted image of Jesus Christ, first worshipped secretly among the Jewish craftsmen. The Roman Emperor Constantine is said to have seen a cross in the sky and heard the words, "In hoc signo vinces," under this sign you shall conquer, inspiring his conversion to Christianity. However, history showed the opposite of what was supposedly promised by the divine voice. As Rome adopted a symbol representing a humble carpenter who preached a gospel of loving one's enemy, the savage empire crumbled. The fact that the Roman Empire fell almost simultaneously with its official embrace of Christianity has long been met with defensiveness by Christian scholars and historians. St. Augustine's book, The City of God, considered to be one of the most vital theological texts in the history of Christianity, was intended to address this point. However, no defensiveness is really necessary. The teachings of Jesus Christ were obviously not intended for the purpose of building a society based on plunder, and the fact that they would play a role in its demise rather than the strengthening of such an empire should not be surprising. In the twilight years, the once powerful military city-state could not even raise its own armies. The Germanic tribes, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, who played a pivotal role in Rome's ultimate demise, did not even battle against Roman centurions. The decaying empire was so weak that it fought the Germanic tribes, not even with its own soldiers, but by hiring other Germanic tribes to fight on its behalf. As it reached its end, an empire founded on military plunder was so weak that it could not even raise its own army to defend itself. Despite the reactionary nature of the Roman world order, the fall of Rome made conditions far worse. It took 1,100 years before Europe's population returned to what it had been at the height of the Roman Empire. The average height of people dramatically declined and decreased due to a lack of nourishment and caloric intake. In their orgy of destruction, the barbarian tribes made a point of burning books and records and attempting to erase scientific progress. The barbarians of Central Europe had essentially beaten the Romans at their own game. The dying empire was brought down by pagan tribes who worshipped Odin, a god of valor and grit, who seemed to embody the animalistic tendencies of Romulus and Remus. Unlike the Romans, the Goths and Vandals did not even construct cities, but lived in the woods as nomadic raiders, plundering what prior civilizations had built and ushering in an era of huge setbacks with very little human progress. That is depressing, and that's about the fall of the Roman Empire. And it's from the beginning section of my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. So enjoy it, folks. Folks, I'm an optimist. I believe that our country is at a turning point and that we have a way out of this madness. This can be the moment where America hits its rock bottom. This can be the moment where America realizes it has a problem. And this could be the moment where America has a great turnaround. This can be the moment, I really do believe, that just as the American Revolution was preceded by the Great Awakening, and the Civil War was preceded by the Second Great Awakening, that we are now at the very beginning stages of the Third Great Awakening, the socialist awakening of America, where it's time to turn this country around. It's time to move in a different direction. We need a government of action to fight for working families. It won't be a religious movement. No, it'll be a political movement, a secular mass awakening about the need for socialism. We have a problem in this country called capitalism, called imperialism. And we need a government of action that will fight for working families. I believe we are at the turning point. The great socialist awakening of the United States is in the process of taking place. You have a role to play in it. Ask yourself, what have you done to build the Center for Political Innovation? How can you get involved? How can you help out? How can you make a difference? How can you save the United States from falling the way the Roman Empire did? How can you prevent a societal collapse? How can you help bring about an American rebirth? How can you do it? Ask yourself how to do it. The Center for Political Innovation is moving into being. We're going to start building a very powerful think tank. It's going to change how Americans think. It's going to change the ideological conversation. It's part of a much bigger plan to build cooperative enterprises to change so much in this country. You can be part of it. You can play a role in history. You can take up history's challenge. You can take history into your own hands. Think about it. Wrangle with yourself. What can you do? What can you do to help this country turn around and get out of the disaster created by greed? Think about it. And on that note, folks, remember, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Have a good day, folks. I'm out.